Why you always wanna go and get me so emotional?
35 miles from Detroit is the quaint, idyllic village of Armada. But on the evening of July 24th, 2014, a grim discovery sparks the beginning of a small-town murder mystery.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain we just found a body along the mountain bike trail.
Is that a male or a female?
Female.
And you don't believe she's breathing?
I don't believe so, no. She's off of the trail, we touched back into the woods, her clothes are all taken off.
My name is Philip Newmeyer. I was an officer with the Armada Police Department. I was the first officer on scene. She was back in here, past the ditch line, over in there. When we first got here, we had myself and the 2 EMS people crossed over through the ditch, and then we saw her laying there. It was ugly. She was severely beaten about the head and chest. Her shorts that she was wearing, along with more undergarments, were pulled down to her ankles. So she was partially nude. I believe her eyes were still open. It was difficult to get an age. She was violently beaten. It was obvious it wasn't an accident. It was a homicide. They don't have those kind of things in Armada. They're one of your citizens. They're one of the people you're charged to care for. And I guess you feel some guilt that you didn't keep them safe. Excuse me.
Bill Cataldo, take one.
I'm William Cataldo. I'm Chief of Homicide from the Macomb County Prosecutor's Office. Armada is a small jurisdiction. And Armada's maybe 3 or 4 police officers. They don't have the resources to handle this type of crime. But they contacted the Michigan State Police.
My name is Rebecca MacArthur, and I was a detective sergeant with the Michigan State Police. I got the call around 9 o'clock that night and was shocked to hear that there was a female body found in that small town where that doesn't happen. You could see the imprint of the shoe tread on her face. You could see a clear herringbone pattern. She was actually stomped to death. To actually stomp on somebody's face is so disrespectful and so demeaning. Whoever did this not only had complete rage, but it seemed very personal. I was alerted that a mother and young man showed up on the outskirts of where the scene was.
In Armada, news travels fast. 14-year-old April Millsap went on a walk with her dog just a few hours earlier and hasn't come home. So her mother, Jennifer, and April's boyfriend, Austin, show up to the crime scene, fearing the worst.
They told one of the officers that April was missing. And when they gave a description of what she was wearing, that's when the officer told them to go down to the station and talk to a detective.
And soon, a mother's worst fear is realized.
Jennifer Millsap interview, take 1.
April was a loving daughter, always helping her mother, who struggles with a neurological disease that affects her balance and speech.
The FBI came by with a photograph, and she goes, "Is this your daughter?" I could tell it was her. I know it was April.
The body discovered that night belongs to April Millsap. She was just about to start her freshman year at Armada High School. Even as a teenager, she had a close-knit bond with her family. And from an early age, she became close with her stepdad.
April was my only child. When April was 7, I met David. April and him just bonded. David was better to her than her own father was. She was a very fun, loving, kind person. She was pretty shy, but once she got to know you, she never shut up. April was big into social media. Oh, she lived on that phone.
But by middle school, social media had taken a toll on April, and she became concerned about her body image.
My name is Madison Adams. I've known April since 6th grade. Social media and phones had the impact of like self-esteem issues, just comparing yourselves to others. Every day at school lunches, we would get salads, and that would be like the only thing we ate. She had that fitness app to count her steps. She took her dog for walks all the time.
And a lot of times she used that as an excuse to go meet Austin at the park.
Austin was a very nice guy, but he was also very loud and very obnoxious. I do think that him and April had maybe a few arguments here and there. I think a lot of the school might have labeled him maybe as a little bit of a troublemaker.
In Armada, April and her friend group always stood out.
We were kind of the misfits of the area because we didn't really fit in with that country life. For us being in that small town, like every day after school, we'd be out on the streets going to parks or the trail. But never really thought about what could be lurking behind the trees.
On July 24th, 2014, around 6 p.m., April opens the fitness app on her phone and takes her dog Penny for a walk along the Macomb Orchard Trail. She wants to get her steps in. But an hour passes, and she's still not home.
It was approaching 7 o'clock. I started to get concerned.
April's mother isn't the only one that knows something's not right.
I ended up texting all my friends. Everybody basically responded back to me except April.
About an hour after April leaves her house, a married couple spots something unusual on the Macomb Orchard Trail. It's a border collie, alone, dragging its leash behind it.
the dog basically would run into the woods, run back out. And so the gentleman actually got off his bike and went to see where the dog had gone to try and corral it, and then discovered April.
April's murder is tragic and mysterious, but investigators already have a person of interest.
The next morning, we started interviewing April's boyfriend.
Recorder just turned on. It's July 25th, 2014, about 9:13 a.m.
In any murder investigation, husbands, boyfriends, they get looked at first. It's because 55% of all female murders are committed by an intimate partner, and it's usually the guy they're with. And in his interview, Austin says something that detectives just can't shake.
We found he had erased some messages with April.
I can see how that doesn't look too good.
Doesn't look good at all? And why is that?
Because last time I saw we were in an argument.
He admitted that it had not been a great relationship more recently, that they had arguments, texting back and forth on their phones.
How long ago did you delete those messages?
Probably a little bit after I showed up here. I got my phone like freaking out.
Okay. And what made you feel like that we look at you as being involved?
Just the moment, like I didn't know what was going on.
That was suspicious as far as why he would feel the need to erase him. All of a sudden, he was our prime suspect.
After 14-year-old April Millsap is found murdered, investigators begin to question her boyfriend, Austin. And they're shocked to learn he's deleted text messages between the two of them from his phone. But even more shocking is the text that is still on Austin's phone from the evening of the murder.
He showed us the last text message April had sent him around 6:26 p.m.
I think I almost got kidnapped. Oh my fucking God.
And what time was that on there at?
6:28. I responded at 7:44.
That took you a while to respond though, huh?
Austin did not call police, he did not call the mother, and his story was that he didn't look at the message until April's mom called him looking for her. And so that was a little odd because he's a teenager and teenagers always look at their phones.
Awesome. But what happened out there?
Where? With April?
Yeah.
I have no clue. I am not lying to you.
We had to, at length, go over and over again where he was and what he was doing.
Prove to me that you had nothing to do with anything with her being hurt.
I was nowhere near there. My friend Josh wanted me to go help move TV.
And where does Josh live?
New Haven.
New Haven, Michigan is about 10 miles south of Armada.
He was with a friend, he said, that evening. He had mentioned they went to a McDonald's.
Do you remember approximately what time you might have went to the McDonald's?
It would be around 5.
Okay. And did you guys stay there and eat, or what did you guys do?
Drive-through.
Drive-through, okay.
Investigators have to verify Austin's alibi, that he was in another town with a friend at the time of the murder. So on the same day, July 25th, 2014, the day after April is found, Police notify the community.
The Armada Police Department and the Michigan State Police are currently investigating a homicide on the Macomb Orchard Trail. The body was discovered approximately 8:20 last night. The victim has been identified as April Dawn Millsap.
The entire town of Armada is in disbelief.
I still do get like crying spells every day. What happened back then? Like that was my friend. It so affects me a lot.
How do you feel? That's what everybody's asking. How do you feel? I just want to tell them how the blank do you think I feel? All I know is that April's gone.
And just like that, April's death changes their community forever.
Yeah, as soon as that murder happened, we were very scared. There weren't kids playing outside.
A lot of people locked the doors. There was a lot of fear in the town.
Authorities want to heal this community and find justice fast. They question April's mother for any leads. And one detail becomes very important.
When the police officers spoke to April Millsap's mother, she indicated that April always has her phone with her.
If she was meeting somebody on the path that night, the text messages should be on her phone, but her phone was not there.
Local and state police start scouring the region for April's missing cell phone.
We expanded the area to the 3 counties with a team of 40 people. And then we called in every detective for 3 counties because we had a lot of ground to cover.
It's a massive effort.
Ray Peckman interview, take 1.
My name is Ray Peckman. I'm a sergeant with the Michigan State Police. They had an article search dog that was searching that area and ultimately found her phone in some brush off the dirt road.
I think we have something here. It's a phone.
2014-90, Roger.
We actually found it intact, which was a godsend.
Investigators might have just found the one thing that could solve the murder of April Millsap. But no one is ready for the secrets it would reveal. April Millsap's cell phone is discovered and is immediately sent to the Michigan State Police Crime Lab for analysis. Meanwhile, investigators start checking on their prime suspect, April's boyfriend, Austin. And they question people that know him firsthand.
The police did end up talking to me about Austin. I knew that they were very much in love, and I did not think Austin was capable of that. People in the community did suspect him for it. When he deleted those text messages, it was probably going through his head like, oh no, they're gonna really think that I did it because we were fighting.
As they continue to dive into Austin's story and his history with April, the police have to also consider another terrifying possibility.
This could be a stranger murder. And if that's the case, the chances of solving it are little to none.
Through relentless questioning, detectives begin to uncover people who were on the Macomb Orchard Trail on the day of April's murder.
One of our detectives came across this young girl who said, I saw a white van and he was acting creepy.
She was at her house. White van was driving slowly through the neighborhood and looked like it was two individuals in it, which now seemed very suspicious.
The young girl who saw the van had the insight to take a picture of it just in case.
Whether it's intuition or just plain luck, something tells this eyewitness that van was important.
It wasn't a great picture. We couldn't see a plate or anything like that, but it was good enough to get a description that it was like a box, like a cargo van.
April texts Austin at 6:28 p.m. The van is spotted somewhere around 6:30 p.m. down by the Macomb Orchard Trail. The timeline fits.
If you know somebody that has that type of van, the police are asking the citizens to contact the Michigan State Police tip line.
As investigators make a public plea for information about the mysterious van, police continue to look into April's boyfriend, Austin.
My name is James Sharp, and I'm a detective sergeant with the Armada Police Department. I followed up on the boyfriend. We were able to timestamp him being at a fast food place and that he could not have been at the scene of the murder, so it cleared him from the list of suspects.
With Austin cleared, there's even more pressure to find the suspicious white van spotted near the Macomb Orchard Trail on the day of April's murder.
Police are searching for a white van. They would close down roads entering and exiting the town.
Tips start flowing in. Over 1,000 tips during this investigation.
We're literally just looking for a needle in a haystack.
Detectives stop dozens of white vans, hoping to find the one from the photo. And then, they find it.
Eventually, the owner of that van actually called himself in. He was watching the news about the van, and he realized that was him. He was a builder, and he was showing a co-worker of his different homes that he had built in that area.
The van may have been spotted by the Macomb Orchard Trail, but there's nothing to tie the driver to the crime. Investigators are back to square one.
Knowing the gravity of the situation that you were in, the pressure was immense. It's an important case. We needed all the help we could get.
And they get it from the community.
Finally, an actual witness came in. It was a man and his two daughters who had been walking on the path.
They had seen this individual with a motorcycle talking to April Millsap.
His daughters went to school with April, and so they knew her.
So he looked on the internet and sent us a picture of the bike he believed he'd seen on the trail.
In addition to providing a picture of a blue and white motorcycle, they also describe the man in detail, and a sketch is made. But in 2014, there are 249,321 motorcycles registered in the state of Michigan. But it's something. It's hope.
Hide your eyes, keep real quiet. They can hear you, they can hear you.
And there's more. Investigators get a call from the crime lab.
The FBI managed to get into April's phone and extract the data on that phone.
On April's phone is an app, and that app will change the course of the entire investigation.
A fitness app was found running in the background on April's phone that had been on the day of her murder.
This particular app, it not only counts steps, it tracks pace. From walking, to jogging, to running for your life.
The fitness app shows that April left her house around 6 p.m. that evening.
She was walking under 2 miles an hour getting from the house to the trail. At approximately 6:20, April speeds up. She was walking at 2.2, changes direction, comes back at 4.4 miles per hour. At 6:28, she texts her boyfriend Austin something that foreshadows her death. She felt that she was almost kidnapped.
Then it showed a chaotic moment as the line on the map would zigzag back and forth kind of crazily, just off the path. We believe when April was pretty much fighting for her life.
Capture, my shadows can be so haunting.
You can see the panic because the phone is moving all over the whole time.
If I run and hide, find a way to save me. Breathing. Take me into heaven. Save me from the demon.
Then, April's phone takes off.
The speed of the app goes up to 18 miles an hour.
Investigators come up with a theory. The killer fled the scene on the blue and white motorcycle that was spotted on the trail that day.
He must have had the phone on him. And so the murderer's escape route was in the data on that phone.
It runs towards the end of the trail, and the line takes a little jog to where that phone was dumped.
The data from April's fitness app tells a story. A story about a girl, a monster, and a motorcycle.
Only in the movies would this happen, where you get this kind of great evidence. We just had to figure out who this person was.
April would have been 22 today. I just can't believe it's been that long already since April passed.
One day after the murder of April Millsap, investigators have collected a few key pieces of evidence. Data from a fitness app, a sketch, and the description of the motorcycle that investigators believe sped away from the crime.
We were now looking for a motorcycle.
If police find that motorcycle, there's a good chance they find April's killer.
On the evening of the 25th, during our canvass of the area, I was driving about 25 minutes outside of Armada when I noticed a motorcycle parked down in a driveway, very similar to the type of bike that's being described by some witnesses. My mind started wondering, could that possibly be this motorcycle? What would be the odds of that? I ran the license plate, found out the name, James Van Callis Jr.
32-year-old James Van Callis Jr. grew up in Armada.
James Van Callis, on paper, he did not match who we were looking for. He had no documented history of violence. Seemed like a personable guy.
Later that evening, about 11 p.m., we went out to James Van Callis's residence. James Van Callis Jr. came out on the porch, followed by his father, James Sr. He did take us around the side of the house, so I was able to take a couple photos of the motorcycle.
The bike is a blue and white dirt bike, exactly like the witness statement. But is there anything else that would make this 32-year-old man a suspect? April was stomped to death. Her killer left a distinct shoe print on her chest. So does Van Callis Jr. own a pair of shoes that could make those same marks?
I asked him what kind of shoes he was wearing and if I could see them. And he showed me a pretty beat up old pair of K-Swiss tennis shoes. I knew when I flipped those shoes over that that was not the tread pattern we were looking for.
James Van Callis Jr. doesn't seem to raise any red flags. But the other man that comes to the door, his father, 67-year-old James Van Callis Sr.
His father had been convicted of a sexual offense with a minor girl.
And investigators believe April's murder was sexually motivated.
His demeanor seemed a little strange. Something's just not right about this guy.
State police and the FBI raiding this home today. Officers confirming the search is in connection with the murder investigation of April Millsap.
When the team made entry on the front door, smell was bad. There was garbage and junk just piled up. It was disgusting. And then in the backyard, we came across an enclosure for a dog, and much to our surprise, it was filled with marijuana plants growing.
Growing marijuana in Michigan isn't illegal. But the Van Callis family doesn't have the proper permits.
The two of them were arrested at that point. The motorcycle was seized. The helmet was seized. They would then take it directly back to the lab for processing.
On August 1st, Van Callis Jr. and Sr. are arraigned on drug charges. That same day, a little more than a week after April's death, the town of Armada turns out to say goodbye. Jennifer sees her daughter for the first time at her funeral.
They had her all made up and everything. I mean, I picked out the outfit that she would wear. She was everything to me. I don't like crying in front of people.
I can see there's more than meets the eye.
It's not your normal funeral. Law enforcement is still at the height of an active homicide investigation.
We had to have police at the funeral. They roadblocked the streets because they were questioning people. Did you see anything?
Investigators are looking for any evidence tying either Van Callis Sr. or Jr. to April's murder. And then, a call comes in.
When James Van Callis was in jail, his girlfriend called us crying.
She has a story to tell. But it isn't about Van Callis Sr. It's about her boyfriend, James Jr.
Crystal Stadler, take one.
My name is Crystal Stadler. I met James, I think it was right out of high school, like senior year. I guess you could call it love at first sight. I mean, he was a nice guy. But we got into the relationship and he totally changed. He got abusive.
Were you scared of him?
Yes. He always threatened to kill my family. If I would ever leave him, he was gonna kill my family. So that's why I ended up staying in this relationship, because I didn't want my family dead.
After his arrest on drug charges, Crystal tells investigators a story. Something that happened on the night April Millsap was murdered.
I woke up in the middle of the night and seen James cleaning his shoes. His black and white ones. The one with the little dude on it. Air Jordans. He was using hand sanitizer with a sock. He told me he got oil on them, that he was cleaning oil off of them. And then I ended up going back to sleep. But it just didn't sound right with me. When the police showed up, James told us to lie about his shoes and tell them that he was wearing K-Swiss shoes. I was freaking out.
James Van Callis Jr. had told investigators that he was wearing K-Swiss shoes on the day of April's murder. But according to Crystal, it was a lie. And there was something else.
The sketch came out in the newspapers and all over.
Did the sketch look like James?
Yeah, it did. I was freaking out. It was kind of hard to deal with. You know, I kind of kept to myself.
Crystal had been groomed from an early age by Van Callis. She started dating him when he was 27 and she was 17. She moved into their compound, and like most pedophiles, he was able to isolate her in this place.
But because he's locked up in jail, I got over the fear of he's not gonna come and do anything to me. So I came and told the police everything that I knew.
Which shoes did you say?
His Jordans, his black and white ones.
Nike Air Jordans, not the K-Swiss shoes he'd shown police. And while the investigators do not find Air Jordans in the Van Callis home, they do find a clue on social media.
We were able to find a Facebook photo of James wearing these pair of shoes. We were able to identify the shoes as being Air Jordan tennis shoes. The make was Flight the Power. Once we identified the style, a pair was ordered online in the size that James Van Callis wears, and those shoes were then given to the lab. The lab was able to produce a scan-type photo of that shoe print and lay that shoe print over April and line up that tread pattern exactly.
Not only was James Van Callis Jr. in possession of the shoes that matched the tread marks found on April's body, investigators are able to put him in close proximity to the crime scene.
We did a search of his phone records and found that he was actually in the village of Armada at the time of our murder, which was around 6:30 p.m. The murderer's escape route was in the data on that fitness app. And he went back through town, and he just so happened to go past a video surveillance camera. So the fitness app data and the video surveillance matched up perfectly.
Once we got James Van Callis's phone, it had so much information. The shoes that he wore during the time that he killed April Millsap, the Google searches that he did, like how to get young girls interested in older guys. And you have April being 14 years old. I'm saying to myself, this guy killed April Millsap.
On October 8th, 2014, 6 months after her body was found, police charged James Van Callis Jr. with the murder of April Millsap.
Van Callis is charged with 3 counts. Count 1, first-degree premeditated murder. Count 2, felony murder. And count 3, assault with intent to commit sexual penetration.
Do you know who the Van Callis family was or anything about them?
My sister actually ended up growing up with him. And my mom also drove him on the bus. She had said she always knew this man would grow up to break the law in some way. She just didn't expect it to be this bad.
On February 8th, 2015, one of the biggest murder cases in Macomb County history gets its day in court.
Doug Scott interview, take 1.
My name is Doug Scott, and I was chosen to be the jury foreman in the James Van Callis murder trial. There was so much circumstantial evidence. The shoes that came up missing, but he had pictures of them in his phone.
What was he telling to everybody in the house?
To tell him that he was wearing K-Swiss shoes.
The tread prints from another pair of the same company, same brand, matched what was on her.
Was he wearing K-Swiss shoes that night?
No.
The biggest thing was the fitness app on the phone.
Were you in the trial when they played the video of the tracking information from April's phone?
To see that, very heartbreaking. To think of what it's like to fight for your life for 7 minutes from somebody who's trying to steal it from you. That's a lot.
Pick up your feet, child.
It was overwhelming evidence.
Child, world knows no peace, child.
It takes the jury 6 hours to consider the evidence. But they finally come back with a verdict.
Don't get too close to the fire.
James Van Callis found guilty of first-degree murder.
Guilty of murdering 14-year-old April Millsap.
On March 30th, 2015, James Van Callis Jr. is sentenced to life in prison without parole.
James, I don't know why you did what you did, but my question to you is why? What did they probably do to you? For you to be so brutal with her. You stole my beautiful daughter's life, and you stole the rest of mine.
Just by using that fitness app tracker, she was able to tell the police, without using any of her own words, where she was at what time, and literally showed what happened, not through a video camera, but through movements that were tracked on the phone.
Oh, let it rain.
It's quiet now, in April's garden. A place where you can witness the cycle of life, death, and rebirth with the seasons. It's a place of remembrance.
There's not a day that goes by that I don't wish it. What if I would have gone with her?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. You are a really strong person.
People say that it's an act, but I pretend.
And I won't let it bring me down.
The fitness app on April Millsap's phone helped track her journey to become her best self. But when that journey came to an end, it became the key to track down her killer.
I like to imagine that she's with me all the time. It kind of gives her like some sort of memory, like she still exists. She's gone and I'm never gonna get her back. But I'm trying to keep April's memory alive.
And I won't let it bring me down.
The ocean is a relentless force. It possesses a rhythm that has outlasted generations, a continuous, violently beautiful collision of water against ancient rock. On the island of Leon, the ocean is not just a backdrop. It is a definitive boundary. It is a vast, isolating wall of deep blue that dictates the pace of life, separating the inhabitants from the mainland and binding them together in a shared, unspoken pact of community. In the late 2000s, Leon was the kind of place where isolation was viewed as a profound comfort rather than a vulnerability. It was a haven of familiarity. People knew their neighbors by name and routine. They recognized the vehicles parked outside the local storefronts. They understood the quiet, predictable cadence of the daily ferry arrivals, and they navigated their lives with an inherent trust. The concept of an anonymous threat, of a predator lurking in the shadows, belonged exclusively to the sprawling, nameless cities on the mainland, not to their wind-swept sanctuary. But geography, no matter how isolating, cannot filter out the darkest elements of human nature. The same deep waters that provide a sense of absolute security can also serve as the perfect, inescapable perimeter for a hunting ground. The illusion of Leon's impenetrable safety was not shattered by a sudden, deafening event, but rather by an agonizing absence. It began with the slow, terrifying realization that someone had vanished from the very fabric of the island. It was a Friday afternoon, a specific time of the week typically associated with the collective exhale of the working population. The air usually carries a palpable sense of anticipation, of weekend plans and familial gatherings unfolding. For one young woman, this particular Friday appeared to adhere strictly to that comfortable routine. The meticulously recorded digital data from a local workplace security camera captured what would unknowingly become the final, hauntingly mundane moments of her public life. The digital timestamp glowing in the corner of the grainy footage reads exactly 1745. The workday had officially concluded. She is seen exiting the heavy glass doors of her office, stepping out into the fading late afternoon light. The silent lens watches her back as she moves with distinct purpose. She is holding a light jacket in her hands, a practical, everyday defense against the coastal breeze that reliably sweeps across the island as evening approaches. Her stride is noticeably hurried. There is a forward momentum to her posture, a physical translation of someone who is running late, someone whose mind is already fixed on her destination. She is walking toward the employee parking lot, navigating the familiar, cracked pavement with the practiced ease of daily repetition. The silent footage offers absolutely no hint of apprehension, no nervous, lingering glances over the shoulder. She is simply a young woman eager to reach her next appointment, completely unaware that she is stepping out of the frame of ordinary life and straight into a fathomless abyss. That hurried walk across the asphalt to the parking lot remains the last verified visual of her alive. What follows is a rapid descent into both a digital and physical void. As she presumably entered her vehicle and drove away, her routine route took her directly toward the northern sector of Leon Island. This specific area is notorious among locals for its rugged, unforgiving topography, a place where the modest island infrastructure surrenders completely to raw nature. The dense, overgrown terrain and towering, ancient rock formations create a natural, impenetrable barrier, resulting in a severe blind spot for modern telecommunications. Her cell phone signal, a digital tether to the outside world, vanished entirely the moment she crossed the threshold into this atmospheric dead zone. In an era where constant, immediate connectivity was rapidly becoming the societal norm, a dropped signal was perhaps an annoyance, but rarely an immediate catalyst for alarm. Yet, as the Friday evening progressed into the deep night, the ongoing silence from her end evolved from a mere technical glitch into a profound, terrifying absence. She did not arrive at her home. She did not contact her waiting family. The anticipated weekend began not with relaxation, but with a creeping, suffocating panic that quickly engulfed those who loved her. For 48 excruciating hours, the entire island of Leon existed in a state of suspended animation. Her family endured the unique, unyielding torture of the unknown, a psychological purgatory where every ringing telephone or knock at the door brings both a desperate surge of hope and a sickening wave of nausea. The community, tightly bound by its close-knit nature, rallied in a frantic, disorganized search. Their voices echoed across the dense landscape, calling her name, only to be swallowed whole by the wind and the dense canopy of trees. The island, usually perceived as so familiar and intimately small, suddenly felt impossibly vast and filled with dangerous shadows. Every unlit dirt road, every dense patch of coastal woodland, transformed overnight into a sinister question mark. The protective geography of their home had suddenly turned hostile. The agonizing wait concluded not with a tearful homecoming, but with a gruesome discovery that would permanently alter the psychological landscape of the island. The answer lay on a remote coastal cliff, a jagged area defined by its harsh, unforgiving elevation and its staggering, lethal drop to the churning, violent waters below. A local hiker, drawn to the solitary, rugged beauty of the elevated coastal trails, noticed something that violently disrupted the natural geometry of the landscape. It was an anomaly resting at the very apex of the cliff. From a distance, it was merely an unfamiliar, static shape silhouetted against the expansive sky. But as the hiker cautiously approached the precipice, the horrific reality crystallized. It was the missing young woman. The crime scene at the top of the cliff was a chilling study in terrifying contrasts. Far below, the ocean waves crashed relentlessly against the rocks with a deafening, violent roar, a chaotic, continuous display of natural power. Above, exactly where the body lay, there was an unnatural, eerie stillness that defied the elements. The coastal wind, carrying the sharp, bitter taste of ocean salt, whipped aggressively across the summit. It would eventually tear at the thin yellow police tape that investigators strung up to encircle the area, the fragile plastic snapping violently in the gusts. Yet, the scene contained within that fragile boundary possessed a deeply chilling serenity. She was not a tragic victim who had simply succumbed to the treacherous, uneven terrain. She had not slipped in the dark. She had not lost her footing and plummeted to the jagged rocks below. The placement of her body was entirely deliberate, calculated, and devoid of accident. She lay flat, positioned precariously near the very edge of the steep precipice. It was a terrifying proximity to the void, an arrangement that felt less like an abandonment of a body and more like a macabre, highly staged presentation. It was as if she had been purposefully offered to the vast expanse of the ocean, a silent, grim message left on the edge of the world. The physical evidence, or rather the terrifying lack thereof, told a story of overpowering physical control. Investigators meticulously examined the ground leading directly up to the cliff's edge on their hands and knees. In a situation involving a desperate struggle for life, the earth always bears witness. Soil is violently displaced, vegetation is crushed, long streaks of disturbed dirt and broken roots indicate frantic attempts to break, to hold on, to survive. Here, The grass remained largely pristine and undisturbed. There were no deep gouge marks from desperate fingernails clinging to the earth, no trampled ground suggesting a frantic, panicked fight near the lethal drop. The ground was entirely silent. But the most disturbing detail of all, the specific anomaly that shifted the atmosphere of the crime scene from merely tragic to deeply, psychologically sinister, was the placement of her footwear. Her practical work shoes were not on her feet. They were not scattered haphazardly in the brush as if lost during a violent scuffle. They were set neatly on the ground, placed with deliberate, terrifying precision exactly 2 meters away from her lifeless body. They sat perfectly side by side, aligned with meticulous care. This single, quiet detail shattered any remaining illusion of a chaotic accident or a hastily executed, panicked crime of passion. The placement of the shoes was an act of profound, chilling composure. It was a ritualistic gesture, or perhaps the dark manifestation of a terrifyingly calm mind functioning smoothly and methodically in the immediate aftermath of inflicting extreme violence. The killer had taken the time, presumably in the pitch black of the night, standing on the edge of a deadly drop, to arrange a pristine still life of their victims' belongings. The subsequent autopsy results would later strip away the final, protective layers of mystery surrounding her death, replacing them with cold, clinical facts that were far more horrifying than any local speculation. The pristine condition of the cliff edge was finally explained by the brutal mechanism of her death. She had not been thrown over the edge. She had been carried there after the fact. The medical examiner definitively confirmed that the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. She had been brutally strangled. The specific nature of the deep tissue injuries indicated an attacker possessing significant, overwhelming physical strength, someone entirely capable of executing a swift, decisive, and inescapable assault from behind. The attack was clearly designed to incapacitate and silence her rapidly, immediately eliminating any chance for a prolonged, noisy fight or a desperate cry for help that might echo across the quiet island air. However, it was the specific timeline of her death that introduced the absolute most disturbing element of the entire investigation. The forensic pathology analysis successfully determined the estimated window of her passing. She had not been killed immediately upon her sudden disappearance from the parking lot. The scientific findings indicated that she died approximately 6 hours after she vanished from the island's telecommunications grid. 6 hours. It is an excruciating, unimaginable expanse of time. The revelation hung heavily over the police investigation, forming a dark, oppressive cloud of unanswered questions. From 1745, when she briskly walked toward her car with her jacket in hand, until near midnight, she was alive. Where was she held during that terrifying, extended window of time? Was she transported immediately to the vicinity of the cliff under the cover of dusk, or was she concealed securely elsewhere on the island before enduring her final journey to the precipice? The 6 hours of missing time fundamentally transformed the case from a sudden, violent ambush into a prolonged, psychological nightmare. This was clearly not a random, unfortunate encounter gone wrong. This was not a robbery motivated by financial desperation. Her personal jewelry remained completely untouched on her body. Her purse was recovered at the scene, its contents utterly undisturbed, with one glaring, highly significant exception. Her car keys were missing. The total absence of the vehicle keys, combined with the untouched valuables, pointed directly and undeniably to a highly specific, targeted attack. The killer wanted her, and only her. Moving a lifeless body across the rugged, unforgiving, and deeply uneven terrain of Leone Island, especially under the heavy, disorienting shroud of darkness, is a massive logistical nightmare. To do so without leaving a chaotic, obvious trail of broken branches, dragged earth, and discarded physical evidence requires significantly more than just raw physical strength. It demands an intimate, flawless, and deeply ingrained knowledge of the landscape. The person who carried her up to that windy cliff did not stumble blindly through the dense brush. They navigated the invisible, unlit pathways of the island with the supreme confidence of someone who knew every hidden rock, every subtle dip in the elevation, every dense, confusing cluster of trees. They fully utilized the natural isolation of the island, purposefully exploiting the northern telecommunications dead zone and the treacherous coastal cliffs, expertly transforming the very geography of Leon into a private, impenetrable arena for their brutal crime. This chilling realization fundamentally and permanently shifted the psychological landscape of Leon Island. The terror felt by the residents was no longer an abstract concept. It was localized and immediate. The predator was clearly not a transient drifter passing through on the afternoon mainland ferry. The extraordinary level of geographic familiarity required to execute this flawless crime suggested a horrifying, unavoidable proximity. The killer knew the land intimately because they lived on it. As the torn yellow police tape flapped wildly in the salty wind at the very edge of the deadly cliff, a profound, heavy, and permanent paranoia settled over the once trusting community. The isolated island was no longer a safe sanctuary. The people of Leon were forcefully compelled to look at one another through a new, terrifying lens, heavily burdened by the sudden realization that the monster who left a young woman on the edge of a cliff, the meticulous predator who calmly and quietly aligned her shoes in the dark, might very well be the exact same neighbor who smiled and waved at them every single morning. The silence of the cliff had spoken volumes, and it echoed continuously with the terrifying sound of a predator hidden perfectly in plain sight. To understand the profound tragedy of what occurred on that remote coastal precipice, one must first deeply examine the unique psychological and geographical ecosystem of Leon. The island is a place defined entirely by its formidable natural boundaries. The deep, churning water surrounding the landmass is not merely a topographical feature. It acts as an imposing psychological barrier, effectively insulating the inhabitants from the chaotic unpredictability of the outside world. It creates a closed-loop society where the sprawling mainland feels like nothing more than a distant, abstract rumor. On an island like Leon, the very concept of an anonymous stranger is almost entirely foreign. The community operates on a highly intricate, invisible web of long-standing familiarity and rigidly predictable daily routines. The residents inherently recognize the distinct hum of their neighbors' vehicles, they anticipate the regular arrival of the supply ferries, and they navigate their existence governed by the quiet, unspoken rules of deep rural life. This absolute, pervasive familiarity breeds a profound, and ultimately dangerous, level of collective trust. It is an environment where residential doors are frequently left unlocked against the coastal winds, where automotive keys are routinely left resting in ignitions, and where the heavy darkness of the island night brings a comforting solitude rather than an innate, instinctual fear of the unknown. The geography provides the comforting, persistent illusion of an impenetrable fortress, a natural sanctuary completely shielded from the random, senseless acts of violence that routinely plague the nameless, sprawling cities situated across the water. Within this tightly woven, trusting fabric of island life, the young woman existed as a remarkably steady, deeply reliable thread. She was the absolute embodiment of the community's quiet work ethic, a dedicated professional who navigated her daily life with an unpretentious, steadfast dedication. While the specific, intimate details of her internal aspirations remain rightfully private, the outward footprint she left on her community was remarkably clear and indisputable. She was universally known by her peers for her strict punctuality, her highly structured daily routines, and a deeply ingrained sense of personal responsibility that permeated every single aspect of her existence. She was absolutely not a person prone to sudden, erratic decisions or spontaneous, unexplained absences. Her life was a meticulously organized calendar of professional obligations, familial connections, and the quiet, expected comforts of a well-established routine. This inherent, undeniable reliability is precisely what made her sudden, inexplicable disappearance so immediately and profoundly alarming to everyone who knew her. When a human being whose entire life is defined by predictable, dependable patterns suddenly vanishes without a single trace, the resulting absence does not feel like a careless, youthful mistake. It feels like a violent, catastrophic rupture in the very fabric of reality. Her professional life firmly anchored her days, providing a predictable structure to her time on the island. The office environment she departed at exactly 17:45 on that fateful Friday afternoon was a space of organized calm, a direct reflection of her meticulous, detail-oriented nature. Her colleagues relied upon her as a constant, unwavering presence. She was the individual who arrived early to prepare for the day, and she departed only when her numerous responsibilities were fully and completely addressed. The highly practical nature of her daily attire, particularly those sensible, unglamorous work shoes later found so chillingly and carefully arranged near the lethal cliff edge, spoke volumes about her pragmatic approach to the world around her. She clearly prioritized functional utility and steadfast reliability over fleeting, impractical trends. Those specific shoes carried her diligently through the mundane, repetitive, yet necessary tasks of daily life, grounding her firmly in the reality of her responsibilities. They were a physical symbol of her ordinary, unglamorous, yet deeply meaningful and connected existence. To see those exact items transformed into a macabre, terrifying display of psychological control by an unseen predator is a profound, sickening violation of everything she represented in life. It was a cruel, calculated subversion of her practical nature, permanently turning an object of everyday utility into a dark symbol of ultimate, inescapable vulnerability. Friday afternoons on the island of Leon possess a distinct, almost palpable shift in atmospheric pressure. The rigorous, unrelenting demands of the structured work week slowly begin to dissolve, systematically replaced by a collective, island-wide anticipation of rest, recreation, and familial gathering. The fundamental rhythm of the community shifts gears. For the young woman, this particular Friday afternoon was absolutely no exception to that established rule. She had evening plans, a specific destination, and a clear reason to move with a hurried, focused purpose captured so clearly on the workplace security footage. The light jacket she clutched firmly in her hand was a clear testament to her practical preparedness, a subtle, everyday acknowledgement of the island's shifting coastal climate as the afternoon warmth inevitably surrenders to the biting evening chill. She was actively anticipating a completely normal evening, smoothly navigating the standard transition from professional duty to personal time. The most devastating, heartbreaking aspect of the tragedy lies entirely in the absolute, unquestionable normalcy of her final known moments. She was completely untethered from any sense of impending doom or danger. There was absolutely no grand, cinematic foreshadowing in her physical demeanor, no nervous, lingering backward glances toward the shadows. She was entirely consumed by the mundane, everyday logistics of reaching her next stop, utterly and completely oblivious to the terrifying reality that her meticulously planned schedule was about to be violently and permanently interrupted. Her regular, established commute required navigating the island's distinct, contrasting geographical zones. Leon is absolutely not a homogeneous, easily traversable landscape. While the harbor area and the small commercial center offer a comforting semblance of modernized, suburban safety, the northern sector of the island presents a stark, unforgiving, and deeply rugged contrast. It is a dense region where the untamed coastal vegetation aggressively reclaims the land, and the topography becomes increasingly hostile and difficult to navigate. The winding asphalt roads narrow significantly, the evening shadows stretch longer and darker, and the modern telecommunications infrastructure that connects the island residents to the outside world begins to systematically fray and ultimately fail completely. This specific, treacherous route was not an unknown, frightening path to her. It was simply a necessary transit corridor, a familiar stretch of road that she had traversed countless times before without a single incident. However, this deep familiarity bred a fatal, tragic blindness to the inherent vulnerability of the location. She understood the rough geography simply as a local resident, recognizing the total lack of cellular service merely as a temporary, modern inconvenience, a brief moment of forced digital disconnection in an otherwise connected life. She could not possibly fathom that someone else viewed this exact same geography through the chilling, calculated lens of a predator, recognizing the profound isolation not as a mere inconvenience, but as a highly critical, exploitable tactical advantage. The unseen person waiting patiently in the deep shadows of that technological dead zone understood the island's unique rhythm just as intimately and thoroughly as the victim did. This was unequivocally not a crime of sudden, uncontrollable impulse born in the heat of a random, unfortunate encounter. The incredibly meticulous nature of the fatal attack, the complete, baffling absence of any physical struggle at the pristine cliff edge, and the terrifying, ritualistic arrangement of the shoes all point definitively to a prolonged, calculated period of intense observation. The perpetrator absolutely knew her schedule. They understood the deep significance of her departure time on a Friday afternoon. They recognized the exact, terrifying window of absolute vulnerability created by the northern route and the sudden, predictable absence of a digital tracking signal. The chilling, inescapable reality is that while she was busy organizing her office files, planning her upcoming weekend, and quietly executing her daily responsibilities, she was simultaneously being systematically reduced to a target. Her predictable routines, the very attributes that made her such a reliable, respected, and deeply loved member of the community, were efficiently weaponized against her. She was carefully tracked through the mundane patterns of her existence, silently hunted within the claustrophobic, inescapable confines of an island that offered absolutely no route of escape. The horrifying transition from a perfectly normal Friday evening to a waking, unending nightmare was not marked by a sudden, jarring alarm, but by an agonizingly slow, suffocating accumulation of absolute silence. When she failed to arrive at her anticipated evening destination, the initial reaction from her waiting family was not sheer, unadulterated panic, but rather a rational, deeply grounded concern. On an isolated island characterized by notoriously spotty cellular coverage and winding, occasionally treacherous coastal roads, a slight delay in arrival is easily and logically rationalized. Perhaps she had experienced a flat tire in the remote northern sector. Perhaps she had stopped by the roadside to speak with a familiar neighbor and simply lost track of time. The human mind possesses a remarkable, desperate capacity to construct logical, benign explanations in order to temporarily ward off the terrifying, paralyzing specter of tragedy. Her family clung desperately to these rationalizations as the minutes slowly and agonizingly bled into hours. They waited anxiously by the telephone, anticipating the sudden, relieving ring that would immediately explain the delay. They looked repeatedly out the window, expecting the familiar, comforting sweep of her vehicle's headlights cutting through the descending coastal darkness. But those headlights never materialized, and the telephone remained stubbornly, cruelly silent throughout the night. As the evening slowly deepened into the absolute pitch black of the island night, those initial rational explanations began to systematically collapse under the crushing, undeniable weight of her continued, terrifying absence. The silence stretching outward from the northern dead zone became incredibly deafening. It is a uniquely terrifying, claustrophobic experience to realize that someone you deeply love is missing within a geographically confined space. There is no vast, anonymous interstate highway network for them to simply vanish into. There are no distant municipalities or international borders to cross unseen. She was entirely confined to Lyon, an island where you cannot simply disappear into a crowded city street. The chilling realization that she was out there, somewhere hidden in the dense brush or along the treacherous, unstable coastline, transformed the deeply familiar landscape into an expansive, highly menacing void. The family's anxiety rapidly escalated from mild concern to a suffocating, paralyzing dread that seized their chests. They frantically began retracing her known steps, desperately calling her colleagues, and driving the familiar route toward the dark northern sector, their vehicle high beams illuminating nothing but empty asphalt and thick, unyielding darkness. The subsequent 48 hours were an absolute masterclass in psychological torture for those who loved her most. It was an excruciating period defined entirely by a desperate, frantic energy colliding constantly with a horrifying, absolute lack of factual information. The rising morning sun brought absolutely no comfort, only the stark, undeniable, and terrifying reality that she had been completely missing for an entire night. The tight-knit community of Lyon, previously viewed as a source of immense comfort and security, suddenly felt agonizingly small and woefully ill-equipped to handle a sinister crisis of this magnitude. Frantic neighbors quickly organized ad hoc search parties, aggressively combing through the coastal trails and the dense woodlands, calling her name repeatedly until their voices grew entirely hoarse. Every snapped branch underfoot, every discarded piece of debris found in the deep woods sent a sudden, agonizing jolt of pure adrenaline through the desperate searchers, followed inevitably by the crushing, devastating disappointment of yet another false lead. The family existed in a terrible state of suspended animation, trapped painfully between the desperate, fading hope of a miraculous, safe return and the dark, encroaching terror of a devastating, permanent conclusion. They were forced to endure the agonizing, slow passage of time, entirely powerless to alter the trajectory of the unfolding nightmare that had consumed their lives. The exact sequence of events that unfolded immediately after the young woman departed the safety of her office parking lot at 1745 remains obscured by a terrifying, impenetrable darkness, yet the immutable physical evidence left behind allows us to construct a devastatingly clear picture of the incident itself. Her intended route inevitably directed her vehicle toward the northern perimeter of Lyon, a geographical transition that effectively severed her completely from the protective, watchful eyes of the community and the invisible, digital safety net of the modern world. As her car navigated the increasingly narrow, winding asphalt that snaked through the dense, encroaching coastal woodland, the vibrant, reassuring bars of cellular service on her mobile device would have systematically deteriorated before vanishing entirely. This precise moment of technological isolation, a daily, mundane inconvenience for the residents of the island, was the exact vulnerability the predator had meticulously anticipated and flawlessly exploited. The total disappearance of her car keys from the otherwise completely undisturbed contents of her personal belongings recovered at the crime scene serves as a crucial, terrifying indicator of how the initial interception occurred. This was not a situation where she merely pulled over to admire the fading twilight or step out for a breath of coastal air. The missing keys strongly suggest a forced, abrupt cessation of her journey, a moment where the control of her vehicle, and consequently her own autonomy, was violently and decisively wrested from her grasp. The predator actively stopped her forward momentum, utilizing the extreme isolation of the northern dead zone to execute the first, critical phase of their carefully orchestrated ambush. The transition from a completely ordinary Friday evening commute to a state of absolute, terrifying captivity was undoubtedly sudden and executed with overwhelming, paralyzing efficiency. The forensic pathology report paints a deeply disturbing picture of the initial physical assault, highlighting a stark, insurmountable disparity in physical power between the victim and her attacker. The specific nature of her injuries definitively indicates that the assailant launched their brutal strike entirely from behind. This was a calculated, highly tactical maneuver designed specifically to immediately neutralize any potential for a desperate, chaotic struggle or a frantic attempt at self-defense. By attacking from her blind spot, utilizing significant, overwhelming physical strength, the predator instantaneously robbed her of the fundamental ability to assess the threat, to fight back, or to unleash a desperate scream into the heavy island air. The attack was clinically precise and devastatingly effective, plunging her instantly into a nightmare where physical resistance was rendered completely impossible. The absolute lack of any disturbed earth, torn vegetation, or scattered personal items near the final resting place on the cliff edge further corroborates this terrifying reality. She was entirely subjugated before she ever had the opportunity to physically fight for her survival. The swiftness and the overwhelming force of this initial ambush solidify the horrifying conclusion that she was targeted by a deeply capable, focused individual who possessed a chilling degree of physical control and a dark, purposeful intent that entirely excluded robbery or random, chaotic violence. Her purse remained full, her jewelry remained completely untouched, but her freedom and her life were immediately forfeit. The most profoundly disturbing revelation provided by the meticulous post-mortem examination is the agonizing, almost incomprehensible timeline of her ultimate demise. The scientific analysis definitively established that she did not perish in the immediate, chaotic moments following her sudden abduction from the Northern Road. Instead, the forensic evidence dictates a horrifying reality that she remained alive for approximately 6 hours after she vanished from the island's telecommunications grid. 6 hours is a vast, excruciating expanse of time, an eternity when measured in the agonizing currency of human terror. This prolonged window of survival transforms the nature of the crime from a swift, brutal ambush into a sustained, psychological nightmare of unimaginable proportions. During this extensive period, the sun completely surrendered to the horizon, enveloping the rugged geography of Lyon in a thick, absolute blackness. Where was she held during these agonizing hours while her family began their frantic, desperate search through the encroaching darkness? Was she concealed within the cramped, suffocating confines of a vehicle, parked silently on some forgotten, unlit dirt road hidden deep within the coastal brush? Or was she transported immediately to a secondary, isolated location on the island, forced to endure the agonizing anticipation of her impending fate while completely surrounded by the vast, indifferent silence of the natural landscape? The mere existence of these 6 hours introduces a layer of psychological torment that is almost too heavy to fully comprehend. It speaks to a predator who is not acting out of a sudden, desperate panic or a frantic need to quickly eliminate a witness. Instead, it reveals a highly controlled, incredibly patient killer who possessed the chilling capacity to hold a living, terrified human being captive for an extended period, maintaining absolute dominion over her existence while the rest of the island remained entirely oblivious to the horror unfolding within its borders. When the terrifying, 6-hour suspension of her life finally reached its brutal conclusion, the mechanism of her death was as intimate as it was utterly merciless. The medical examiner identified the absolute cause of death as mechanical asphyxiation. This clinical, scientific terminology describes an act of profound, deeply personal violence. It requires the perpetrator to maintain sustained, overwhelming physical pressure, literally forcing the life from the victim through sheer, unrelenting force. It is not a distant, detached method of ending a life. It necessitates close, horrifying proximity and a terrifying commitment to the act of killing. The forensic evidence indicating an attack from behind suggests that this final, fatal act was executed with the same overwhelming, incapacitating power as the initial ambush. The sheer physical strength of the attacker ensured that the process was horribly decisive. In the deep, suffocating darkness of the island night, far removed from the desperate, echoing calls of the search parties that were undoubtedly beginning to mobilize, her life was violently extinguished. The act of mechanical asphyxiation is inherently designed to induce silence, completely preventing the victim from drawing the breath required to scream, to call out, or to draw any attention to their desperate plight. The terrible paradox of her final moments lies in the contrast between the absolute, forced silence of her passing and the deafening, continuous roar of the ocean waves crashing against the unseen rocks somewhere in the distance. The natural environment of the island, the very place she called home, bore completely silent witness to the complete, brutal theft of her future. The immediate aftermath of the murder presented the killer with a monumental logistical challenge that ultimately revealed the most terrifying aspect of their psychological profile. The victim was now a lifeless weight, and the chosen final destination was the absolute apex of a treacherous, elevated coastal precipice. Transporting a body through the pitch-black darkness of a moonless island night, navigating across uneven, rocky terrain, and pushing through dense, unyielding coastal underbrush is an incredibly arduous physical task. For an outsider, or even an average resident unaccustomed to traversing the uncultivated wildlands of Lyon in the dark, it would be a chaotic, clumsy endeavor guaranteed to leave a massive, unmistakable trail of broken branches, disturbed earth, and discarded physical evidence. Yet, the exhaustive forensic sweep of the immediate area leading up to the cliff edge yielded absolutely nothing. There were no drag marks scarring the damp earth, no snapped twigs indicating a heavy, burdened passage, and absolutely no signs of a desperate, panicked struggle with the hostile terrain. The killer moved through the deep shadows with the silent, practiced grace of an apex predator seamlessly navigating its natural habitat. This flawless, untraceable movement definitively confirmed the most chilling hypothesis of the entire investigation. The perpetrator was not simply a strong individual. They were intimately, profoundly connected to the specific geography of Lyon. They possessed a deep, ingrained knowledge of the land that allowed them to confidently carry a heavy burden up a treacherous incline without ever losing their footing or disturbing the natural environment. They knew the exact location of every hidden rock, the specific density of every patch of brush, and the precise, invisible pathways that connected the dense woodland to the stark, elevated precipice. Upon finally reaching the summit of the cliff, standing dangerously close to the sheer, lethal drop to the violently churning ocean below, the killer engaged in a final, deeply disturbing act of staging that completely shattered any remaining semblance of normalcy. The victim was not hastily discarded or carelessly pushed over the edge in a frantic attempt to permanently destroy the physical evidence of the crime in the deep, unforgiving water. Instead, she was deliberately, carefully placed on the ground, positioned precariously near the absolute edge of the abyss. The placement was highly deliberate, presenting a stark, horrifying contrast against the magnificent, brutal beauty of the natural environment. But the ultimate display of the killer's terrifying psychological composure was yet to come. With complete, absolute calm, standing in the pitch black near a deadly drop, having just committed an act of unspeakable, intimate violence, the perpetrator carefully removed the victim's sensible, everyday work shoes. They did not throw them into the ocean. They did not toss them carelessly into the thick brush. They took the time, the deliberate, calculated time, to place those shoes exactly 2 meters away from the lifeless body. They aligned them perfectly, side by side, creating a chilling, pristine still life amidst a scene of profound horror. This precise, ritualistic arrangement was an incredibly loud, silent declaration of total control. It was the physical manifestation of a completely undisturbed, highly organized psychological state in the immediate aftermath of murder. It transformed the isolated clifftop from a mere dumping ground into a dark, private exhibition, leaving the tight-knit community of Lyon to grapple not only with the devastating loss of a beloved resident, but with the paralyzing, unavoidable realization that an incredibly meticulous, highly capable monster was living quietly among them, fully capable of executing a flawless, terrifying hunt within the perceived safety of their island sanctuary. The official discovery of the body on the Lyon cliffs marked a grueling, fundamental shift for the local authorities, moving the operation from a desperate search and rescue mission into the cold, clinical reality of a homicide investigation. As the first forensic teams ascended the rugged northern terrain, the atmosphere was thick with a heavy, salt-laden wind and a palpable sense of disbelief. For a small island police force, the scene they encountered was not just a tragedy, it was a technical and psychological enigma that defied the standard patterns of violent crime. The initial phase of the investigation focused heavily on the immediate perimeter of the victim's final resting place, a meticulous, inch-by-inch examination of the earth that yielded a terrifying conclusion through what it lacked rather than what it provided. Investigators found themselves on their hands and knees, searching for the standard hallmarks of a struggle: the torn grass, the deep gouges in the soil from a person trying to arrest a fall, or the scattered debris of a life being violently interrupted. Instead, they found a pristine silence in the landscape. The ground around the victim was disturbingly undisturbed, confirming the suspicion that she had not lost her footing and had not fought her attacker at this specific location. This silence of the earth became the first major piece of the forensic puzzle, suggesting that the cliff was a chosen destination, a staged endpoint rather than a site of spontaneous conflict. As the crime scene investigators expanded their radius, the focus narrowed intensely on the most chilling anomaly of the case: the shoes. The sight of the sensible, everyday work footwear placed with such absolute, Geometric precision 2 meters away from the body sent a ripple of unease through even the most seasoned officers. In the forensic world, the arrangement of a victim's belongings after a crime is often referred to as staging, a behavior that provides a direct window into the perpetrator's psyche. The investigation team began to analyze the implications of this act with growing dread. A chaotic, frenzied killer, acting out of a sudden burst of rage, would have left the scene in a state of disarray. Yet, here was evidence of a profound, cold-blooded composure. The placement of the shoes suggested a ritualistic mindset, or, at the very least, a person who felt so entirely in control of the environment and the situation that they felt they had the luxury of time. This was not the work of someone panicked by the proximity of the cliff's edge or the darkness of the night. The investigation began to lean toward the profile of a predator who viewed the act of murder as a process to be completed with a terrifying level of order. The shoes were a silent testament to a killer who was not just strong, but fundamentally calm in the immediate wake of extreme violence, an individual who could stand on the brink of a lethal drop in the dead of night and meticulously curate a scene of horror. The investigation then turned to the medical examiner's office, where the autopsy would provide the most significant turning point in the entire timeline of the case. When the results were finalized, they shattered the initial assumptions about the speed of the crime. The confirmation of mechanical asphyxiation as the cause of death provided a clear picture of the physical requirements of the killer. This was a crime that required sustained, overwhelming strength and a duck coat, or decisive, execution from behind. It spoke to an attacker who knew exactly how to incapacitate a person quickly, eliminating the possibility of a scream or a prolonged struggle. But it was the secondary finding, the estimated time of death, that acted as a forensic lightning bolt for the detectives. The victim had been alive for approximately 6 hours after her initial disappearance at 1745. This 6-hour gap became the central obsession of the investigation. It meant that while the island was beginning to stir with concern, while her family was making the first anxious phone calls, she was being held somewhere. The search for a secondary crime scene or a holding location became a high priority. Detectives began to re-examine the geography of the northern sector, looking for any structure, any hidden clearing, or any abandoned vehicle path where a person could be kept for 6 hours without detection. The existence of this window of time fundamentally altered the profile of the killer from a person who committed a crime of opportunity to one who engaged in a prolonged, controlled abduction. The investigation into the digital and logistical trail proved equally frustrating yet illuminating. The last known signal from her mobile phone had been lost as she entered the northern dead zone, a region where the island's rugged topography effectively swallowed telecommunications. Detectives worked with cellular service providers to map out the exact boundaries of this blind spot, realizing that the killer had likely used this specific lack of infrastructure to their advantage. They began to scrutinize the timing of her route, calculating how long it would take to drive from her workplace to the point where the signal vanished. The timing was too perfect to be accidental. This led the investigative team to the firm conclusion that this was a targeted attack. The predator had not just waited for a victim, they had waited for this specific victim, at this specific time, in this specific location where she would be most vulnerable. The motive, however, remained a glaring hole in the case. A thorough inventory of her personal effects at the scene showed that her jewelry and the cash in her purse remained untouched. In a world where most violent crimes are fueled by robbery or desperation, the pristine state of her valuables was a haunting detail. The only item missing from her possessions was her set of car keys. This missing piece of evidence became a focal point for the investigators. Did the killer take the keys as a trophy, or were they taken as a tactical necessity to move her vehicle and further obscure the trail? The absence of the keys, contrasted with the presence of her jewelry, reinforced the theory of a highly specific, personal obsession rather than a random act of greed. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation faced the daunting task of profiling a killer who left no physical trace of their passage through the wilderness. The forensic team's inability to find drag marks or disturbed vegetation on the path to the cliff led to a profound realization about the suspect's background. Moving a body in the absolute darkness of the late 2000s on Leon, an island with limited lighting and dense, punishing undergrowth, required more than just the physical strength noted by the medical examiner. It required a level of geographic intimacy that only a long-term resident or someone with extensive experience in that specific terrain could possess. The investigators began to look inward, shifting their focus from the possibility of a transient offender to the terrifying prospect of a local predator. They analyzed the skills required to navigate the northern cliffs at night, the ability to move silently, to know the stability of the rock, and to find a precise, elevated location for the final staging. This was a person who belonged to the island, someone who viewed the rugged landscape not as an obstacle, but as a familiar, exploitable tool. The investigation began to compile a list of individuals who possessed this unique combination of high physical strength and specialized knowledge of the northern terrain, including local outdoorsmen, long-term residents with properties in the area, and those whose professions required them to traverse the island's more remote sectors. The psychological weight of the investigation began to take a toll on the community as the police presence intensified. Officers conducted hundreds of interviews, knocking on doors and retracing the Friday evening routines of almost everyone on the northern end of Lyon. They looked for anyone who might have seen a vehicle parked where it shouldn't be, or anyone who noticed a neighbor arriving home later than usual on that fateful night. The detectives were looking for a crack in the facade of normalcy, a single detail that would link a local resident to those 6 missing hours. They analyzed the ferry logs and the movements of the few outsiders who had been on the island that day, but the evidence continually pointed back to the same conclusion. The killer was someone who knew the rhythm of Lyon by heart. They knew when the office closed, they knew the exact route she would take, and they knew exactly how long they had before the search would become organized. The investigation became a high-stakes game of observation, with the authorities trying to find a person who is likely watching them back, perhaps even participating in the community's collective grief, while secretly holding the keys to a devastating crime. The turning point in the investigation eventually came from a synthesis of these disparate forensic threads: the timing of the phone's death, the 6-hour survival window, the strength required for the strangulation, and the terrifying composure shown in the staging of the shoes. The police realized they weren't just looking for a murderer, they were looking for a master of the island's environment. The search for the missing car keys remained a silent, ongoing mission, with divers checking the waters below the cliff and search teams scanning the dense brush along the northern roads. The investigation had reached a critical juncture where the physical evidence had been exhausted, and the case now rested on the ability of the detectives to pierce the veil of the killer's psychological profile. They had established that the island itself had been turned into a weapon, a private arena where a predator could execute a flawless crime and then vanish back into the fabric of a trusting community. The focus of the case had narrowed to a terrifyingly small circle of possibility, leaving the investigators to grapple with the reality that the man they were looking for was likely someone who was currently walking the same streets and breathing the same salty air as the victim's mourning family. The investigation into the silence of the Lyon cliffs had finally revealed the loudest truth of all. The monster was not a stranger, but a shadow that had always been there, waiting for the perfect moment to step out and claim its target. The transition from the rugged, windswept heights of the Lyon cliffs to the sterile, wood-paneled confines of a courtroom represented a shift from the visceral reality of a crime to the cold, analytical dissection of human behavior. When the legal proceedings finally commenced in the late years of the decade, the atmosphere surrounding the trial was heavy with a unique form of social exhaustion. The island of Lyon had been living under a cloud of suspicion for months, and the commencement of the trial was seen as the only possible path toward reclaiming some semblance of the peace that had been so violently stolen. The courtroom was not merely a venue for legal debate. It was a place where the community's collective trauma was laid bare, and where the meticulous, invisible work of the investigators was finally transformed into a formal narrative of guilt. The prosecution faced a monumental task, as they were dealing with a case that was largely built on a foundation of sophisticated forensic evidence and psychological profiling rather than eyewitness testimony or a traditional confession. They had to weave together the disparate threads of a 6-hour window, the mechanical nature of the death, and the chillingly precise staging of the crime scene to convince a jury that the horror on the cliff was the work of a calculated, local predator. The heart of the prosecution's case rested on the testimony of the medical examiner, a moment in the trial that grounded the abstract legal arguments in the brutal physical reality of the victim's final hours. The examiner's presentation was clinical and exhaustive, focusing with intense detail on the mechanism of mechanical asphyxiation. They explained to the court the sheer level of physical commitment required to end a life in such a manner. This was not a swift, accidental event, but a prolonged and intimate act of violence that required the attacker to maintain absolute control over the victim. The prosecution used this forensic data to build a profile of a suspect who possessed significant physical strength and a terrifying degree of focus. But it was the detailed analysis of the 6-hour window that truly haunted the courtroom. The medical examiner walked the jury through the biological markers that established the time of death, forcing everyone in the room to confront the reality that the victim had remained alive for a vast expanse of time after she had been abducted from the Northern Road. This revelation served as the emotional and logical anchor of the trial. It transformed the crime from a momentary lapse into a sustained, deliberate kidnapping. The prosecution argued that these 6 hours were not a period of hesitation, but a period of absolute dominion, proving that the killer was a person who was comfortable operating in the shadows of Lyon for an extended duration without fear of discovery. Following the forensic timeline, the prosecution turned its attention to the psychological significance of the crime scene staging, specifically the placement of the shoes. This was perhaps the most complex part of the trial, as it required the jury to look beyond the physical evidence and into the mind of the perpetrator. The prosecution called upon criminal profilers to explain the concept of post-mortem staging. They argued that the act of placing the shoes exactly 2 meters from the body, aligned with such chilling precision, was the ultimate signature of a killer who craved order and control. It was presented as a direct refutation of the defense's theory that the death could have been a tragic accident or a crime of sudden, uncontained passion. A person acting in a state of panic or a stranger unfamiliar with the terrain would have fled the scene immediately, leaving behind a trail of chaos. The prosecution emphasized that the killer had stood on the edge of that deadly precipice in the middle of a pitch-black night and took the time to create a still life of their victim's belongings. This act, they argued, was only possible for someone who felt a profound sense of ownership over the location and who possessed the psychological composure to linger at the site of a murder. The shoes were not just footwear. They were pieces of a puzzle that pointed toward a local individual who viewed the island's most dangerous heights as a private, safe space for their dark rituals. The defense, in turn, attempted to dismantle this narrative by leaning heavily on the lack of direct physical evidence connecting any specific individual to the cliff edge. They argued that the very geographic intimacy the prosecution cited as proof of a local killer was a double-edged sword. They suggested that the island's rugged nature made it impossible to rule out a highly skilled outsider, a transient or a visitor who might have spent enough time in the northern sector to learn its secrets. The defense tried to paint a picture of a phantom, offender, a shadow from the mainland who could have arrived on a ferry, committed a random act of violence, and vanished back across the water before the search began. They attacked the forensic timeline, questioning the precision of the medical examiner's estimates and suggesting that the 6-hour window was a scientific overreach. They pointed to the missing car keys as evidence of a robbery gone wrong, despite the fact that the victim's jewelry and cash were untouched, arguing that keys were a functional item for a quick escape. The defense's strategy was to create a sense of reasonable doubt by highlighting the vast, empty spaces of the island's northern wilderness, suggesting that in such a place, anyone could hide and anyone could be a monster. However, the prosecution's most powerful counterargument returned to the silent testimony of the Earth itself. They brought in geological and tracking experts who had examined the path leading to the cliff. These experts testified that the absolute lack of drag marks, broken branches, or disturbed soil was the most damning evidence of all. They explained to the jury that for a body to be transported to that specific apex without leaving a single trace of struggle with the environment, the person carrying it had to possess a near-supernatural familiarity with every rock and root along the way. They argued that an outsider, no matter how skilled, would have left some mark of their passage in the dark. The prosecution hammered home the idea that the killer didn't just know Lyon, they belonged to it. They navigated the northern sector with a confidence that can only be built over years of daily exposure. This geographic signature was presented as a fingerprint of its own, one that could only belong to someone who lived within the community. The prosecution's narrative was that the killer had used their intimate knowledge of the island's blind spots and its treacherous terrain to turn their home into a hunting ground, confident that their neighbors' trust would serve as their ultimate shield. As the trial reached its closing arguments, the focus shifted from the technicalities of forensics to the profound violation of the community's trust. The prosecution reminded the jury that the victim was a person of deep routine and reliability, someone who had been stolen from the fabric of their lives by someone who likely knew exactly how much she would be missed. They framed the missing car keys not as a sign of robbery, but as a final act of tactical suppression, a way for the killer to ensure that the victim's vehicle remained a silent, unmoving witness to her disappearance. The closing statement was a somber reflection on the nature of evil in a small place. It possessed a deep, quiet power, urging the jury to see the precision of the shoes and the silence of the cliffs not as mysteries, but as declarations. They argued that the evidence, when viewed as a whole, pointed to a single, inescapable truth. The predator was a man of the island, a person who had utilized the very isolation that the residents cherished to hide a crime of unimaginable coldness. The jury was left with a haunting image of a killer who could walk among them by day, offering a friendly nod or a helping hand, while carrying the secret of those 6 hours in the dark. The period of jury deliberation was a time of agonizing tension for the island of Leon. The community was held in a state of suspended animation, caught between the desire for a definitive answer and the fear of what that answer would reveal about one of their own. When the verdict was finally announced, the atmosphere in the courtroom was not one of celebration, but of a heavy, somber relief. The defendant was found guilty on all counts, including kidnapping and first-degree murder. The jury had been moved by the overwhelming weight of the circumstantial evidence, finding the prosecution's narrative of geographic intimacy and psychological control to be the only logical explanation for the pristine nature of the crime scene. The sentencing followed shortly after, with the judge delivering a stern rebuke of the calculated and ritualistic nature of the killing. The perpetrator was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, ensuring that they would never again walk the trails of Leon or utilize its shadows for their dark purposes. The result of the trial provided a legal conclusion to the case, but it did little to immediately heal the psychological wounds of the community. The revelation that the killer was indeed a local resident, someone who had been integrated into the daily life of the island, confirmed the residents' worst fears. The trial had stripped away the illusion of the island as a fortress of safety, replacing it with the reality that danger does not always come from across the water. The legal proceedings had meticulously documented the theft of a young woman's life and the terrifying composure of her killer, leaving behind a record of a crime that would be studied for years to come. For the family of the victim, the verdict brought a sense of justice, but the 6 missing hours and the ritualistic arrangement of the shoes remained a permanent, haunting part of their memory. The trial of the Leon Cliff murder was over, but the silence that followed was different than the one that had existed before. It was a silence informed by the knowledge of what can happen when a predator finds a way to hide in plain sight, utilizing the very beauty and isolation of their home to mask a heart of absolute darkness. The courtroom had provided the facts and the verdict, but the island was left to grapple with the long-term consequences of a trust that had been irrevocably shattered. The conclusion of the legal proceedings on the island of Leon did not bring the immediate sense of closure that the residents had so desperately anticipated. Instead, it marked the beginning of a long, slow, and deeply painful period of introspection for a community that had been forced to witness the absolute destruction of its most cherished myth. For generations, the people of Leon had operated under the comforting, unquestioned assumption that their geographic isolation was a physical guarantee of safety. They believed that the deep, churning waters of the ocean acted as a natural filter, keeping the senseless violence of the mainland at bay and preserving a sanctuary where trust was the fundamental currency of social interaction. The conviction of one of their own for the meticulously planned murder on the cliff shattered this illusion with a finality that no court verdict could ever repair. The aftermath of the case was not defined by a return to normalcy, but by the permanent, haunting realization that the most dangerous threats do not always arrive on the afternoon ferry from the outside world. Sometimes, the monster is born, raised, and nurtured within the very heart of the community, utilizing the shared traditions and the intimate knowledge of the land to mask a soul capable of unimaginable cruelty. The physical landscape of Lyon, once viewed with a sense of pride and serene comfort, was irrevocably transformed in the collective consciousness of the inhabitants. The northern cliffs, previously celebrated for their rugged beauty and the breathtaking views they offered of the infinite horizon, became a site of profound psychological avoidance. To look upon those heights was no longer to see the majesty of nature, but to be reminded of the chilling, ritualistic display that had been left there in the dark. The silent cliffs became a monument to a specialized kind of horror, one that was quiet, methodical, and deeply personal. The community began to view its own geography through a lens of tactical vulnerability. Every remote trail, every dense thicket of coastal brush, and every blind spot in the telecommunications grid was now seen as a potential trap. The isolation that had once felt like a protective embrace now felt like a suffocating cage, a place where a predator could operate with absolute impunity because they knew exactly where the world wasn't looking. This shift in perception altered the very way the islanders moved through their own home. The carefree, solitary walks along the coast were replaced by a newfound, heavy caution, and the comfortable silence of the island night was now filled with the unsettling echoes of a paranoia that refused to dissipate. Central to this enduring trauma was the memory of the victim herself, a woman whose life had been an exemplary model of the island's best qualities. She was remembered not just as a tragic figure on a cliff, but as the steadfast, reliable professional who had been a constant thread in the fabric of Lyon's daily life. The irony that her own predictability, her commitment to routine, and her unwavering reliability had been systematically weaponized against her by a predator was a source of profound, collective grief. The community mourned not only the loss of a daughter, a colleague, and a friend, but the loss of the safety that her presence had once represented. In the years following the trial, her story became a somber cautionary tale about the fragility of trust in a small place. The sensible work shoes that had been so cruelly arranged at the crime scene remained the most enduring and disturbing image of the entire tragedy. They served as a permanent, psychological anchor for the community's grief, a symbol of a life of diligent, ordinary purpose that had been interrupted by an act of extraordinary, calculated malice. The shoes represented the final, chilling moment of control exerted by the killer, a reminder that even after life has been extinguished, the desire to dominate and stage the reality of the victim can persist in the mind of a meticulous predator. The psychological shadow cast by the killer's identity was perhaps the most difficult aspect of the aftermath for the islanders to navigate. To accept the verdict was to accept that they had shared their lives, their greetings, and their space with a man capable of holding a terrified human being captive for 6 hours before ending her life with his own hands. The neighbor factor created a deep, systemic fracture in the island's social trust. Residents began to re-examine years of mundane interactions, looking for the hidden cracks in the killer's facade that they had missed. They wondered how many times they had stood in the same grocery store line or exchanged a nod on the street with a man who was simultaneously scouting the northern roads for a target. This retrospective paranoia made every smile feel potentially deceptive and every act of kindness feel like a possible mask. The community was forced to grapple with the terrifying reality that extreme evil does not always announce itself with outward signs of madness or instability. In the case of the Lyon Cliff murder, the evil was quiet, it was physically strong, and it was devastatingly familiar. The killer had used his intimate connection to the island to hide in plain sight, proving that the most effective camouflage is often a shared history and a common zip code. The 6-hour window of the victim's survival remained a source of haunting speculation that the community could never truly resolve. While the legal case had provided the biological and forensic facts, the human cost of those 360 minutes was something that could only be felt in the deepest, most private moments of reflection. Those hours represented a void of unimaginable suffering, a period of time where the victim was alive in the dark while the rest of the island continued its evening routines, entirely unaware of the proximity of the horror. This gap in the timeline became a metaphor for the limitations of community. It served as a stark reminder that even in a place where everyone knows everyone, a person can still be profoundly alone and utterly invisible in their moment of greatest need. The thought of those 6 hours forced the residents to confront the gaps in their own awareness and the terrifying ease with which a life can be pulled out of the light and held in a state of suspended animation by a determined, focused will. It was a realization that fundamentally changed the way people looked out for one another on Leon, leading to a more vigilant, and perhaps more weary, form of neighborly concern. As the late 2000s gave way to a new decade, the island of Leon slowly attempted to rebuild its shattered sense of identity, but the scars of the Cliff murder remained visible in the subtle changes to daily life. The era of the unlocked door and the keys left in the ignition was effectively over, replaced by a more modern, mainland-style approach to personal security. The northern sector of the island saw the installation of better lighting and the eventual expansion of the telecommunications network, closing the dead zones that had once been the predator's greatest tactical advantage. However, these physical improvements were mere band-aids on a deeper, psychological wound. The true legacy of the case was the loss of a specific kind of innocence, the naive belief that geography is destiny and that isolation is a shield. The people of Leon learned, through the most devastating means possible, that safety is not something granted by the ocean or the cliffs, but something that must be actively maintained through vigilance and a clear-eyed understanding of the complexities of human nature. The trust that had once been given freely was now something that had to be earned, and even then, it was often accompanied by a lingering, quiet doubt. The story of the woman on the Leon Cliffs eventually took its place in the darker annals of true crime history, often cited as a definitive example of the local predator profile and the chilling effectiveness of post-mortem staging. For the outside world, the case was a fascinating study in forensics and psychological control. But for the island of Leon, it was a lived reality that continued to echo through the generations. The families who stayed on the island passed down the story not as a sensationalist thriller, but as a somber lesson in the reality of their home. They taught their children to respect the beauty of the cliffs, but to never underestimate their danger, and to value the community while remaining aware of the shadows that can exist within it. The victim's name became a symbol of a turning point in the island's history, a marker between the era of absolute trust and the era of guarded reality. Her memory was kept alive through quiet acts of remembrance, and her life was honored by the community's commitment to ensuring that such a silence would never be allowed to fall over the island again. Ultimately, the ocean continues to crash against the base of the Leon Cliffs with the same relentless, indifferent power that it has possessed for millennia. The tides rise and fall, the salt air continues to whip across the summit, and the natural beauty of the landscape remains largely unchanged by the human tragedies that occur within its borders. The silent cliffs still stand as the highest point of the island, a place where the earth meets the sky in a magnificent display of coastal grandeur. But for those who know the history of what happened in the late 2000s, the silence of the cliffs is no longer empty. It is a silence that is heavy with the weight of a stolen life, a meticulous crime, and a community that was forced to look into the abyss and see a reflection of itself. The ocean remains a witness to the secrets of Leon, a vast and unyielding guardian of the truth. And as the wind blows across the apex where a pair of shoes once sat in perfect, terrifying alignment, it carries with it the enduring lesson that the most profound mysteries are not found in the depths of the water, but in the depths of the human heart, where the capacity for both great love and absolute darkness resides in a delicate, often hidden balance. The tragedy at Leon was a reminder that we are never truly as safe as we choose to believe, and that the boundaries we build to keep the world out are often the very same ones that trap us inside with the things we fear the most. The passage of nearly 2 decades since the late 2000s has done little to erode the spectral presence of the Leon Cliff murder from the collective memory of the island. Time, in its relentless and indifferent progression, usually serves to soften the sharpest edges of tragedy, gradually blurring the details of even the most harrowing events until they become nothing more than local folklore. However, on an island defined so strictly by its geography and its isolation, time works differently. The landscape itself acts as a massive, unyielding archive of trauma. The northern cliffs of Leon do not simply exist as a geological formation. They stand as a permanent, silent witness to a crime that redefined the meaning of safety for every person who calls this land home. To walk those elevated coastal trails in the present day is to navigate a space that is still heavily burdened by the events of that fateful Friday evening. The wind still carries the same bitter salt spray, the ocean still roars with the same terrifying power against the jagged rocks below, and the air still feels unnaturally still at the apex, where a young woman's journey reached its brutal, orchestrated end. The echoes of the abyss are not heard in the sounds of the island, but in the profound, heavy silences that still linger in the places where the shadows once converged to hide a monster. The enduring mystery of the 6-hour window remains the most haunting element of the case for those who continue to analyze the psychological landscape of Leon. This specific expanse of time, documented through the cold, objective lens of forensic pathology, represents a terrifying void in the narrative that no trial or verdict could ever truly fill. Between 1745 and nearly midnight, a human life was held in a state of absolute, terrifying suspension. This was not a period of chaotic struggle or panicked movement. It was a period of sustained, calculated control. When we look at the mechanism of the crime, the mechanical asphyxiation, the decisive strike from behind, and the overwhelming physical power required to execute such an assault, we see the profile of a killer who did not just possess strength, but who possessed an incredible, chilling patience. The 6 hours were not a mistake. They were a choice. They represent a predator who is entirely comfortable within the darkness of the island, someone who felt so secure in the northern dead zone that they believed they could hold the world at bay while they completed their dark work. This window of time suggests a secondary, hidden geography of the island, a place between the road and the cliff where the killer felt entirely invisible. It is the realization that such a void could exist in a community so small and interconnected that continues to serve as the ultimate source of the island's lingering paranoia. Re-examining the decisive nature of the killer's actions reveals a level of professional competence that is rarely seen in spontaneous acts of violence. The term duck code, often used by investigators to describe the fatal strike, suggests an absence of hesitation that is deeply unsettling. This was an individual who did not struggle with the morality or the logistics of the act. Every movement, from the initial interception in the telecommunications blind spot to the final arrangement of the shoes on the cliff edge, was executed with the grace and efficiency of a practiced ritual. This level of focus implies that the perpetrator had mentally rehearsed the crime long before the first physical move was made. They had studied the victim's patterns, understood her commitment to her work routine, and identified the exact moment when the modern world would fail her. The crime was a masterclass in behavioral suppression. By taking her keys and leaving her valuables, the killer demonstrated that their goal was not the acquisition of property, but the absolute suppression of the victim's autonomy. The missing car keys were a tactical necessity, a way to ensure that the primary evidence of her journey, her vehicle, remained a static, unhelpful landmark while the killer utilized the dark hours to complete the transition to the cliff. The ritualistic arrangement of the shoes remains the most powerful show, don't tell, detail of the entire tragedy, serving as a chilling signature that speaks louder than any confession ever could. In the world of true crime, staging is often a desperate attempt to mislead investigators, but in the Leon case, the staging felt like a communication. Standing exactly 2 meters away from the body, perfectly aligned and side by side, those shoes were not meant to confuse. They were meant to be seen. They were a manifestation of the killer's psychological state in the immediate aftermath of the murder, a state of absolute, undisturbed composure. This detail alone eliminates the possibility of a killer who is driven by a sudden, uncontrollable impulse. A person who has just committed an act of mechanical asphyxiation on the edge of a lethal precipice in the middle of a moonless night does not accidentally take the time to create a pristine still life. That act requires a mind that is functioning with terrifying clarity. It suggests a killer who viewed the victim not as a person, but as a component in a larger, dark artistic expression. The shoes were the final punctuation mark on a sentence of absolute control, a silent declaration that the predator was the master of both the life he took and the environment in which he took it. The concept of the invisible neighbor is the primary reason why the scars on Leon have never fully healed. In the aftermath of the trial, the island had to confront the reality that geographic intimacy is a double-edged sword. The same deep knowledge of the land that allows a resident to navigate the coastal trails with confidence is the exact same knowledge that allowed a killer to move a lifeless weight through the darkness without leaving a single trace. The absence of drag marks, broken branches, or disturbed earth was not just a forensic detail, it was a testament to a life spent in harmony with the rugged terrain of Leon. The killer moved like a shadow because he was part of the island's own shadow. This realization forced every inhabitant to look at their surroundings and their peers through a fundamentally altered lens. They had to accept that a person could be a dedicated member of the community by day, a helpful neighbor, a familiar face at the harbor, a participant in the local rhythm, and a meticulous, patient monster by night. This duality is the ultimate horror of the Leon case. It suggests that safety is an illusion sustained only by the collective decision to trust, and that once the decision is proven to be a vulnerability, the very foundation of the community begins to crumble. Looking back from the perspective of 2026, the island of Leon serves as a profound case study in the intersection of geography, technology, and human darkness. The northern sector, now better lit and more connected, still carries the atmospheric weight of the late 2000s. The blind spots may have been technically eliminated by cell towers and satellite coverage, but the psychological blind spots, the parts of our neighbors and ourselves that remain hidden from view, are as vast and as deep as ever. The murder at the cliffs was a message sent to the sea, but it was also a message left for the land. It was a reminder that no matter how far we retreat into our sanctuaries, no matter how many boundaries we put between ourselves and the outside world, we can never truly escape the complexities of the human psyche. The victim's legacy is not just a story of a life stolen, but a story of a community that was forced to grow up, to trade its innocent trust for a necessary, heavy vigilance. Her life, defined by practicality and reliability, stands in stark contrast to the senseless, ritualistic cruelty of her end, reminding us that the most meaningful lives are often targeted by those who seek to impose their own dark order on the world. As the sun sets over the Leon cliffs today, the long shadows still stretch across the grass toward the edge of the abyss, just as they did on that Friday evening nearly 20 years ago. The terrain remains as unforgiving as ever, a place where one wrong step can lead to a lethal fall. But the greatest danger on Leon is no longer the height of the cliffs or the violence of the waves. The greatest danger is the silence that still surrounds the memory of those 6 missing hours. It is a silence that reminds us of the fragility of our connections and the terrifying potential for isolation even in a place where everyone is supposed to be known. The Leon Cliff murder was not just a crime. It was a revelation of the abyss that can exist within a single human heart, hidden perfectly behind a mask of normalcy. The island continues to move forward, its people continuing their daily routines and their seasonal traditions, but they do so with a quiet, enduring understanding that the darkness never truly leaves. It simply waits for the next blind spot, the next moment of technological failure, or the next unsuspecting routine to exploit. The echoes of the abyss are permanent, a part of the island's very soul, ensuring that the story of the woman on the cliff and the meticulous predator who left her there will never be truly forgotten as long as the waves continue to strike the shore. In the end, the island of Leon remains a place of breathtaking beauty and profound, unsettling mystery. It is a land of contrasts, where the warmth of a tight-knit community exists alongside the chilling memory of a cold, calculated betrayal. The show, Don't Tell, nature of the island's history is found in the way people now lock their doors, The way they look twice at a car parked in a remote clearing, and the way they speak about the northern cliffs in hushed, respectful tones. The story of case number 5 is not just a chapter in a true crime archive. It is the definitive narrative of the island's modern era. It is a story about the death of a sanctuary and the birth of a new, guarded reality. As we conclude this investigation into the silence of the Leon Cliffs, we are left not with a sense of closure, but with a deeper appreciation for the weight of the unknown. The predator may be gone, but the shadows he utilized still exist, and the ocean still waits at the bottom of the precipice, an eternal, indifferent witness to the secrets that the land can no longer keep. The memory of the young woman, her practical shoes, and her 6 hours in the dark will forever be a part of the wind that sweeps across the heights, a haunting reminder that even in the most beautiful places on Earth, the darkness is only ever one shadow away. The finality of a legal verdict is often mistaken for the resolution of a tragedy, yet on the island of Leon, the conclusion of the trial in the late 2000s did not signal the end of the story so much as it inaugurated a permanent, quiet era of remembrance. In the year 2026, as the modern world continues to accelerate and the digital boundaries that once failed so catastrophically are now reinforced with satellite precision, the case of the Silent Cliffs remains a foundational trauma for the community. The legal system has processed the evidence, the perpetrator has been removed from the streets, and the victim has been laid to rest, but the psychological architecture of the island remains fundamentally altered. To understand the true aftermath of the Leon Cliff murder is to look beyond the courtroom records and into the way the islanders now navigate their own lives, their own landscape, and their own neighbors. The case did not just steal a life. It stole a specific, precious form of communal innocence that can never be recovered by a judge's gavel or a life sentence. It left behind a series of unanswered questions that have transformed from forensic puzzles into philosophical meditations on the nature of evil and the limits of human understanding. The physical site of the crime, the jagged northern precipice that overlooks the relentless ocean, has become a place where time seems to have solidified into a dense, unyielding silence. Today, the narrow road leading to the northern sector is no longer a path into a technological void, but a route monitored by the invisible threads of a fully integrated global network. Travelers and residents alike carry devices that are never truly disconnected, ensuring that the specific vulnerability exploited by the killer, that terrifying 6-hour window of absolute isolation, is a thing of the past. Yet, despite the presence of modern infrastructure, the atmosphere at the top of the cliff remains heavy with the weight of what occurred there. The salt spray still bites at the skin, and the wind still howls with an ancient, indifferent ferocity, but the ground itself feels different. It is a place where the ordinary was violently confronted by the extraordinary, where the mundane ritual of a Friday evening commute was subverted by a ritual of absolute malice. The silence at the cliff edge is no longer just the absence of sound. It is the presence of a memory that refuses to fade, a reminder that even the most beautiful places can be turned into a theater of horror by a sufficiently determined will. One of the most enduring and unsettling mysteries of the case remains the absolute disappearance of the victim's car keys. While her jewelry, her cash, and her personal effects were left as a haunting display of the killer's lack of interest in material gain, the keys vanished entirely from the narrative. They were never recovered from the deep waters below the cliff, and they were never found in the dense, unyielding brush of the northern sector. In the years since the trial, the missing keys have become a potent metaphor for the parts of the case that remain locked away from public view. They represent the tactical mind of the predator, the cold, calculating intelligence that recognized the car as a symbol of the victim's mobility and freedom. By removing the keys, the killer didn't just immobilize a vehicle, he symbolically stripped away the victim's ability to escape her fate. The keys are a missing piece of the puzzle that continues to fuel local speculation and late-night discussions among those who still study the case. They are a reminder that even in a closed investigation, there are always elements that the darkness refuses to return, fragments of the truth that remain buried in the shadows of the island's rugged geography. The 6-hour window between the victim's disappearance and her ultimate passing continues to be the most agonizing aspect of the story for the community of Lyon. In the decades since the event, those 360 minutes have been analyzed and reanalyzed by forensic enthusiasts and local historians alike. They represent an excruciating expanse of time that defies easy explanation. What was the nature of that captivity? Was it a period of terrifying silence, or was it a final, desperate struggle against an inescapable fate? The medical examiner's findings provided the how and the when, but the why of those 6 hours remains a void. This gap in the timeline has become a cautionary tale in regional law enforcement, leading to what is now known in local circles as the Lyon Protocol, a set of rigorous, immediate response measures for missing persons in remote areas. The case proved that in a small, isolated community, time is not a luxury, but a critical, dwindling resource. The 6 hours of the Lyon Cliff murder are a permanent reminder that the window for intervention can be tragically small and that the perceived safety of a trusting environment can lead to a fatal delay in action. The psychological profile of the killer, a man of the island who utilized his intimate knowledge of the land to hunt one of his own, has created a lasting shift in the social fabric of Lyon. The neighbor factor is something that the islanders continue to grapple with, even as the younger generation, born after the trial, begins to take its place in the community. The realization that the monster was not a stranger, but a person who had been integrated into the daily life of the island, has led to a more guarded, more observant form of community interaction. The carefree, unthinking trust of the past has been replaced by a quiet, persistent vigilance. People still smile and wave, they still gather at the harbor and share in the island's traditions, but there is an underlying awareness that everyone carries a hidden world within them. The trial revealed that the capacity for extreme violence can exist alongside the most mundane of lives, hidden behind a mask of normalcy and geographic familiarity. This awareness is a heavy burden for a small community to carry, a permanent crack in the foundation of their collective identity that requires constant, conscious effort to manage. The memory of the victim herself has evolved into a symbol of the very best of Lyon, its reliability, its work ethic, and its quiet, unpretentious strength. She is remembered not as a victim, but as a person whose presence made the island a better, more stable place. Her commitment to her routine, the very thing that the killer weaponized against her, is now celebrated as a testament to her character. In the years following the case, the image of the sensible work shoes has transformed from a chilling forensic detail into a symbol of ordinary purpose. They represent a life that was grounded in reality, a life that was defined by what it contributed to the world rather than what it took from it. To honor her memory is to value the quiet, dependable rhythms of daily life and to recognize the profound importance of the people who keep our communities functioning. The victim of the Lyon Cliff murder was a pillar of her society, and her absence left a void that the island has spent nearly 20 years trying to fill with a more resilient and more aware form of communal life. As we look toward the future, the legacy of the Silent Cliff serves as a definitive marker in the history of true crime storytelling. The case is a masterclass in the show, don't tell, approach to forensic investigation, where the most important truths were found in the silence of the ground and the precision of the staging. It reminds us that the most terrifying crimes are often the most meticulous, and that the greatest threats are often those that are most familiar to us. The island of Lyon has become a case study in the resilience of a small community in the face of absolute darkness. It is a place that has been forced to confront the abyss and has emerged with a deeper, more complicated understanding of itself. The beauty of the cliffs remains, the ocean continues its eternal rhythm, and the people of the island continue to navigate their lives with a new, hard-earned wisdom. The tragedy of the late 2000s was a moment of profound rupture, but it was also a moment that forced a reckoning with the realities of trust, isolation, and human nature. In the end, the silence of the Lyon Cliffs is not an empty space, but a repository of the island's history. It is a silence that contains the roar of the ocean, the whistle of the wind, and the enduring memory of a young woman whose life was a testament to the power of routine and reliability. It is a silence that reminds us that justice, while necessary and important, is not the same as resolution. The predator is gone. The verdict has been delivered, but the questions of those 6 hours and those missing keys remain as permanent fixtures of the island's landscape. The story of the murder on the cliffs is a story about the limits of what we can know about one another and the terrifying potential for the darkness to hide in plain sight. As the sun sets over the island today, casting long, elegant shadows across the rugged northern terrain, we are reminded that the light of the modern world can only reach so far. There will always be places where the technology fails, where the geography is hostile, and where the human heart can lose its way. The island of Leon continues to stand as a guardian of these truths, its silent cliffs a permanent monument to the complexity and the fragility of our existence. This concludes our investigation into the case of the Silent Cliffs. It is a story that begins and ends with the ocean, a force that is as beautiful as it is indifferent to our tragedies. The island of Leon has moved forward, but it has done so with its eyes open, forever changed by the knowledge of what occurred on its northern heights. The victim's story is now a part of the wind and the waves, a haunting and permanent echo of a time when the darkness stepped out of the shadows and claimed one of its own. As we leave the island and return to the noise and the connectivity of the outside world, we carry with us the quiet, enduring lesson of the cliffs, that our safety is not found in our isolation, but in our awareness, and that the most important stories are often those that are told in the silences between the sounds. The case of the Leon Cliff murder is over, but the silence remains, a profound and heavy reminder of the price of trust and the enduring power of a memory that refuses to be silenced by time or tide. As the sun climbs over the horizon on this Tuesday in May 2026, the island of Leon presents a facade of absolute, undisturbed tranquility. The light of the morning sun catches the crests of the waves, turning the surrounding ocean into a shimmering field of diamonds that stretches toward the mainland. To a visitor arriving on the early ferry, Leon appears as a pristine sanctuary, a place where time is slowed to a crawl and where the complexities of the modern world are filtered through the salt and the wind. But for those who carry the memory of the late 2000s, the beauty of the island is forever layered with a deep, silent history. We have spent 8 chapters dissecting the cold, clinical facts of case number 5, the hurried walk at 1745, the 6-hour window of terrifying silence, the mechanical precision of the fatal strike, and the chilling, ritualistic arrangement of the shoes on the cliff edge. Now, in this final part of our journey, we must look at what remains when the headlines have faded and the legal machinery has ground to a halt. We must examine the enduring legacy of the Silent Cliffs and the permanent transformation of a community that was forced to recognize the predator in its own mirror. The year 2026 marks a milestone in the island's history, a point where the distance from the tragedy is now almost as long as the victim's entire life was at the time of her passing. This passage of time has allowed for the development of what local law enforcement now refers to as the Leon Protocol. This is no longer just a set of investigative guidelines. It is a fundamental shift in how the island protects its own. The failures of the late 2000s, the delay in recognizing the disappearance as a targeted abduction, the lack of immediate oversight in the northern dead zones, and the initial assumption of an accidental fall have been transformed into a rigorous, proactive system of community vigilance. The northern sector, once a terrifying void for cellular signals, is now a grid of high-speed connectivity and strategic monitoring. The dead zones have been reclaimed, not just by technology, but by a collective commitment to ensuring that no resident is ever truly isolated again. Yet, as any detective will tell you, technology is only a deterrent. The true legacy of the Leon case is found in the sharpened instincts of the people who live here, a hard-earned awareness that the most intimate knowledge of a place can be the most dangerous weapon in the wrong hands. The psychological impact of the local predator profile continues to ripple through the social structures of Leon in 2026. The conviction of a resident, a man who navigated the same streets and shared the same salty air as the victim's family, created a fracture in the island's soul that has proven remarkably resistant to healing. In a community where everyone is known, The realization that a monster can exist behind a familiar face is a trauma that does not dissipate with a court verdict. It has led to a subtle but permanent change in the way the islanders interact. There is a newfound weight to a neighbor's nod, a lingering question behind a friendly greeting. The trust that was once the island's primary currency has been replaced by a more complex, guarded form of social cohesion. The people of Leon still look out for one another, perhaps even more than they did before, but they do so with a clear-eyed understanding of the capacity for darkness. They have learned that the fortress mentality, the belief that geography is a shield, was a dangerous illusion. The island is no longer a sanctuary. It is a community that understands its own vulnerabilities and acknowledges the shadows that can hide in plain sight. The physical site of the murder, the rugged coastal cliff in the northern sector, has become a place of silent pilgrimage for those who seek to understand the intersection of beauty and horror. In 2026, the cliff top remains largely as it was, a stark, elevated precipice where the wind never truly stops. There is no formal monument here, no plaque to mark the tragedy, but the ground itself seems to hold the memory. Visitors who walk the trail often find themselves speaking in hushed tones, instinctively reacting to the gravity of the location. The show, don't tell, nature of the crime scene is still palpable. You can stand where the body was placed and see exactly what the killer saw: the infinite horizon, the churning water far below, and the absolute isolation of the heights. The placement of the shoes, that chilling signature of a meticulously calm mind, is a detail that continues to haunt the descriptions of the case in every modern criminal psychology textbook. It is cited as the ultimate example of a perpetrator who viewed their victim as an object to be arranged, a component in a private ritual of control. The cliff remains a monument to that control, a place where the silence is so heavy that it feels like a physical presence. The enduring mystery of the 6 missing hours remains the most profound unanswered question in the history of Leon. Despite decades of speculation, academic study, and investigative review, the nature of those 360 minutes between the victim's disappearance and her death remains locked away. The killer, currently serving a life sentence in a high-security facility on the mainland, has never offered a confession or a single word of explanation. He remains as silent as the cliffs themselves, a living repository of the truth that he refuses to share. This silence is his final act of power over the community, a way to keep the mystery alive and to ensure that the tragedy is never fully resolved. For the family of the victim, these missing hours are a permanent void, a space where they are forced to imagine the unimaginable. The 6-hour window has become a metaphor for the limits of justice. While the law can punish the act, it can never truly illuminate the darkness that preceded it. The silent prisoner and the silent cliffs are two halves of the same haunting reality, leaving the island to grapple with a story that has an ending but no real closure. The missing car keys also remain a potent symbol of the case's unresolved fragments. In 2026, they are still the only items of the victim's property that were never accounted for. They have become a sort of local myth, a piece of the puzzle that people still look for when they traverse the northern brush or the rocky shorelines. The keys represent the tactical suppression that defined the crime. The killer's need to not only end a life, but to eliminate the victim's means of escape and her very identity as a mobile, autonomous individual. To this day, the absence of the keys is analyzed by profilers as a sign of the killer's meticulous focus on the functional logistics of the hunt. They are a reminder that even in a case with a definitive conviction, the truth is often scattered in small, hidden pieces that the earth and the sea refuse to yield. The keys are the silent testimony to a predator who was as efficient as he was cruel, a man who understood exactly what to take and what to leave behind to create a scene of ultimate, terrifying order. The memory of the victim has been preserved in a way that transcends the tragedy of her end. In 2026, she is remembered as a symbol of the island's lost innocence, but also as a testament to the strength of a life lived with purpose and routine. The very qualities that made her a target, her reliability, her punctuality, and her commitment to her community, are the things that the islanders now strive to emulate. She has become the guardian spirit of Leon, a reminder that the best parts of ourselves are worth protecting with vigilance. Her sensible work shoes, once a horrific forensic detail, are now viewed by the community as a symbol of the everyday diligence that keeps a society functioning. They represent the quiet power of a life that was grounded in the reality of the island, a life that was taken by a shadow but is now remembered in the light. The annual memorial service, held every May, is not just a time for mourning, but a time for the island to reaffirm its commitment to one another, a moment of collective resistance against the darkness that once tried to consume them. As we conclude this deep dive into the case of the Leon Cliffs, we are left with a profound sense of the island's resilience. Leon in 2026 is a place that has been tested by the ultimate betrayal and has emerged with a more complex, more honest understanding of itself. The beauty of the coastline is no longer a mask for the residents. It is a cherished reality that they no longer take for granted. The silent cliffs will always be a part of their landscape, a place of shadow and memory, but they are also a place where the community's strength was forged. The tragedy of the late 2000s was a moment of profound rupture, but it also revealed the depth of the island's connection and the power of a people who refuse to let a monster have the final word. The silence that remains is not one of fear, but one of respect. Respect for the victim, respect for the land, and respect for the difficult, necessary work of maintaining trust in an imperfect world. The ocean continues its eternal rhythm, striking the rocks of Leon with a force that is both violent and beautiful. It is the same sound that the victim heard in her final moments, and the same sound that the killer tried to use as a shroud for his crime. But the truth, once revealed, has a way of outlasting even the most relentless tides. The case of the woman on the cliff is a permanent part of the island's story, a narrative of hunt and capture, of shadow and light, and of a silence that finally found its voice through the meticulous work of those who cared. As the ferry departs Leon today, the island recedes into the blue of the horizon, a fortress no longer, but a home that has learned the true price of its isolation. The silent cliffs remain at the northern edge, a jagged, beautiful monument to a history that will never be forgotten, and to a young woman whose practical, everyday journey was transformed into an eternal, haunting legacy of the land she loved. The mystery of Leon is settled in the eyes of the law, but in the hearts of those who remember, the wind will always whisper the story of the 6 hours, the missing keys, and the shoes that were placed just so on the edge of the world. The morning of Tuesday, May 12th, 2026, brings a familiar, rhythmic hum to the island of Leon, a sound that has defined this isolated sanctuary for centuries. As the first ferry of the day cuts through the glassy, sapphire surface of the coastal waters, the island wakes with a practiced, unhurried grace. For the casual observer or the temporary visitor, Leon appears to be a place where the passage of time has been rendered irrelevant, a landscape where the rugged cliffs and the dense, emerald underbrush exist in a state of eternal, untouched beauty. But for those who understand the deep, tectonic shifts in the island's social fabric, this Tuesday is more than just another date on the calendar. It is a moment of reflection, a point in time where the distance from the tragic events of the late 2000s has allowed for a final, profound synthesis of everything we have learned about case number 5. As we reach the conclusion of this 10-part exploration, we are forced to move beyond the cold, forensic data and the legal finality of the courtroom to confront the enduring, spiritual silence that still emanates from the northern cliffs. This final chapter is not just about a murder. It is about the long, slow process of a community reclaiming its soul from the shadows of a meticulously calculated evil. Standing at the apex of the northern cliff today, one is struck by the absolute indifference of the natural world to the human dramas that unfold within it. The wind that whips across the heights on this May morning is the same wind that once carried the desperate, unheard cries of a young woman and the silent, focused breath of her predator. The ocean far below, a churning mass of white foam and deep blue, continues to strike the rocks with a violence that is both terrifying and magnificent. It is in this stark, elevated environment that the show, Don't Tell, nature of the Leon case reaches its most powerful realization. To stand in the exact spot where the body was discovered is to understand the terrifying level of control the killer exerted over the landscape. This was not a place chosen at random, it was a theater of absolute power. The geometry of the crime scene, the 2-meter gap between the victim and her neatly placed work shoes, remains the most chilling signature in the history of the island. It speaks of a killer who was not satisfied with the mere act of ending a life, but who sought to impose a dark, ritualistic order upon the chaos of death. In 2026, that order still haunts the imagination of every islander who looks toward the northern horizon. The 1,600-word segments of this narrative have allowed us to peel back the layers of this tragedy with a precision that mirrors the investigation itself. We have looked at the victim's final hurried walk at 17:45, a moment of ordinary purpose that was violently interrupted by a shadow. We have analyzed the agonizing 6-hour window of her survival, a period of time that remains the most profound and terrifying void in the history of Leon. These 6 hours are the true heart of the mystery, a span of time where the victim was alive in a state of absolute captivity while the rest of the island began its evening routines. For the family, those 360 minutes are a permanent psychological prison, a space where hope and horror were inextricably linked. In 2026, the question of what happened in those hours remains the ultimate silence of the cliffs. The killer, now an aging man in a mainland prison, has never offered a single word to bridge that gap. His silence is a final, enduring act of cruelty, a way to ensure that he remains the sole keeper of the victim's final moments. It is a reminder that while the law can provide a verdict, it can never truly provide the why that the human heart so desperately craves. The missing car keys continue to exist as a phantom limb of the investigation, a piece of the puzzle that the earth and the sea have refused to return. In the context of 2026, where every movement is tracked and every object is often digitally tethered, the absolute disappearance of those keys feels like an impossibility. Yet, they remain gone, a silent testament to the killer's tactical suppression. They represent the moment when the victim's ability to escape was permanently severed, the moment when her predictable, reliable journey was turned into a trap. Local folklore on Leon still speaks of the keys, with some imagining them buried deep in the silt of the ocean floor and others believing they were kept by the killer as a trophy of his absolute dominion. Whatever their fate, the keys serve as a permanent marker of the predator's meticulous nature. He did not care for the jewelry or the cash. He cared for the objects of control. The keys were the mechanism of her freedom, and in taking them, he asserted himself as the master of her destiny. This focus on functional logistics over material gain is what separates the Leon killer from the common criminal, placing him in the terrifying category of the patient-focused predator. The transformation of Leon from a place of blind, intuitive trust to a community of informed vigilance is perhaps the most significant legacy of the case. The generation that has come of age since the trial lives in a world that is fundamentally different from the one the victim navigated in the late 2000s. The blind spots of the island, both geographical and psychological, have been mapped and monitored. The northern dead zones are a thing of the past, replaced by a grid of connectivity that ensures no one is ever truly alone on the trails. But the true change is internal. The people of Leon now understand that the geography of their home is not a shield, and that the familiar faces of their neighbors can hide depths of darkness that are invisible to the naked eye. This awareness is not a burden of fear, but a commitment to a new kind of community, one that is built on the active protection of one another rather than the passive assumption of safety. The victim's story has become the foundation of this new identity, her reliability and her diligent life serving as a reminder of what is at stake when a community loses its way. As we look across the island on this Tuesday morning, the image of the sensible work shoes remains the most enduring symbol of the entire ordeal. In the professional world of crime storytelling, we are often taught to look for the grand, cinematic gestures, but the most profound truths are often found in the small, mundane details. Those shoes, placed side by side with such chilling composure, represent the ultimate subversion of the victim's practical, everyday life. They are a show, don't tell, masterpiece of psychological horror, a physical manifestation of a killer who could stand on the edge of an abyss in the dead of night and create a scene of perfect, terrifying order. In 2026, the shoes are no longer just evidence in a cold case file. They are a monument to the dignity of the victim. They represent the work she did, the paths she walked, and the reliability that defined her existence. To remember her is to remember those shoes, and to recognize the profound violation that occurred when they were turned into a signature of a predator's control. The silence of the Leon Cliffs in 2026 is a silence that has been earned through years of grief, investigation, and legal struggle. It is a silence that no longer hides a monster, but instead holds a memory. The story of case number 5 has reached its logical conclusion, but its emotional echoes will continue to vibrate through the rocks and the waves for generations to come. The podcast series ends here, but the narrative of Leon continues, written every day in the way the residents look out for one another and the way they honor the sanctity of their home. We are left with the image of the ocean, the ultimate, indifferent witness to all our tragedies, continuing its relentless work against the shore. It is a force that is both beautiful and terrifying, much like the story we have explored. The cliffs stand as a sentinel between the land and the sea, a place of transition where the ordinary meets the infinite. In the final analysis, the Leon Cliff murder is a story about the fragility of the structures we build to protect ourselves. It is a story about the limits of technology, the power of geography, and the enduring complexity of the human heart. The predator may be behind bars, and the victim may be at rest, but the case remains a permanent part of the island's soul. It is a reminder that we must always be vigilant, always be aware, and always be prepared for the moments when the shadows step into the light. As the sun reaches its zenith over Leon on this Tuesday in May, the island is bathed in a brilliant, clear light that leaves no room for shadows. But the people of Leon know that the darkness will return, and when it does, they will be ready. They carry the story of the woman on the cliff with them, a haunting and powerful legacy that ensures her life, and the lessons of her death will never be forgotten. The silence of the cliffs is finally at peace, but it is a peace that is built on the memory of everything that was lost and everything that was learned in the long, dark hours of that Friday evening nearly 20 years ago. The ferry makes its return trip to the mainland, carrying with it the sounds and the stories of the island. As Leon recedes into the distance, its silhouette against the sky remains a testament to resilience and the enduring power of truth. The investigation into the silence of the cliffs has concluded, but the story of the island continues, a permanent part of the great, unfolding narrative of the human experience. We leave Leon with a deeper understanding of the price of trust and the value of a life lived with purpose. The case is closed, the verdict is final, and the cliffs remain, silent guardians of a history that will forever be written in the salt, the wind, and the memories of those who call this island home. The echoes of the abyss have finally found their rest, and in that rest, there is at last a sense of closure for the woman who walked toward the parking lot at 1745 and for the community that never stopped looking for her. The final chapter of this investigation into the silence of the Leon Cliffs requires us to move beyond the clinical evidence and the logistical timelines to confront the most profound question that lingers in the salt-heavy air of the island. What does this case reveal about the architecture of human darkness when it is allowed to fester within the confines of a closed community? In the late 2000s, the island of Leon was a place defined by its perceived impenetrability, a sanctuary where the geographic boundaries of the ocean were thought to filter out the predatory elements of the modern world. However, the meticulously planned murder of a young woman on the Northern Heights proved that isolation is not a shield, but a theater, a private arena where a patient, focused predator can turn the very beauty of the landscape into a mechanism for ultimate suppression. As we conclude this 10-part narrative on this Tuesday morning in May 2026, we find ourselves returning to the apex of the cliff, not to look for new clues, but to synthesize the terrifying reality of a crime that was defined by what was absent just as much as what was present. The case of the woman on the cliff is the definitive study of the targeted attack, a manifestation of a predatory will that utilized every nuance of the island's unique rhythm to execute a flawless hunt. The departure of the victim at exactly 17:45 on that fateful Friday remains the critical anchor of the entire narrative, representing the moment where a life of diligent routine collided with a plan of absolute malice. To understand the killer's mindset, one must recognize that he did not simply encounter his victim, he observed her. He understood that her work ethic, her punctuality, and her commitment to her professional obligations were the very things that made her vulnerable. In a community as small as Lyon, these predictable patterns are often viewed as a sign of character and reliability, but to the predator, they were coordinates. He knew that the 17:45 mark was the precise moment the office would empty, and he knew that the route north led directly into a technological and physical blind spot. This level of observation requires a specific kind of patience, a chilling capacity to stand in the shadows and watch a fellow human being move through their life with the intention of stopping that movement forever. The killer utilized the island's northern dead zone not just as a location, but as a weapon, recognizing that the sudden absence of a cell signal would provide him with the window of time necessary to transition from an ambush to a state of absolute captivity. The 6-hour survival window identified by the medical examiner remains the most psychologically devastating element of the case. It is a period of time that continues to haunt the collective memory of Lyon because it defies the typical logic of violent crime. Most impulsive or opportunistic murders are swift, driven by a frantic need to eliminate a witness or a sudden burst of uncontrollable rage. But the Lyon killer was not frantic. He held his victim alive for 360 minutes, maintaining a state of total dominion while the sun set and the island was enveloped in the pitch-black darkness of a moonless coastal night. This window of time suggests a predator who is entirely comfortable with the intimacy of terror. Where was she held? The investigation's failure to find a secondary crime scene suggests that the killer moved with such absolute confidence and control that he left no physical trace of the victim's presence in the hours leading up to her death. These 6 hours represent a profound void in the story of Lyon, a span of time where the island's perceived safety was proven to be a dangerous illusion. It is the realization that a monster could hold a living, breathing person for 6 hours in the dark without a single neighbor noticing that serves as the ultimate source of the community's lingering paranoia. When the fatal act of mechanical asphyxiation finally occurred, it was executed with the same chilling focus that defined the entire incident. The forensic pathology reports emphasis on a duck coat. A decisive strike from behind reveals a killer who possessed both overwhelming physical strength and a terrifying lack of hesitation. This was not a struggle, it was an execution. By attacking from the blind spot, the predator ensured that the victim was denied even the most basic opportunity for self-defense or a final, desperate cry for help. The intimacy of strangulation, a method of killing that requires sustained and direct physical pressure, speaks to a perpetrator who is entirely committed to the act of murder. In the silence of the northern heights, far removed from the sounds of the town or the lights of the harbor, the killer forced the life from his victim with a cold, analytical precision. The act of silencing her was as much about the process of control as it was about the result of death. In 2026, the clinical terminology of the autopsy report still struggles to capture the sheer psychological weight of those final moments where the absolute silence of the killer met the forced silence of the victim. The subsequent transport of the body to the absolute apex of the cliff provides the final, undeniable proof of the killer's geographic intimacy. To move a lifeless weight through the dense, unyielding coastal underbrush and across the uneven, rocky terrain of Lyon in the middle of the night is an arduous physical task that would have left any outsider or amateur in a state of chaotic disarray. Yet, the investigation found nothing: no drag marks, no broken twigs, and no disturbed soil. This absence of evidence is the loudest piece of testimony in the entire case. It tells us that the killer was a master of the island's topography, an individual who knew every hidden rock and every invisible pathway as well as he knew his own home. He navigated the shadows with the confidence of an apex predator in its natural habitat, utilizing the very ruggedness of the land to mask his passage. The cliff was not a dumping ground. It was a chosen destination, a place where the killer felt a profound sense of ownership and security. This realization is what makes the local profile so terrifying. It means that the monster did not just live on the island, he belonged to it. The ritualistic arrangement of the shoes, placed exactly 2 meters away from the body with such geometric precision, serves as the final, haunting signature of the crime. Staging a crime scene is often a way to divert attention, but the placement of the shoes on the Leon cliff was something different. It was a presentation. Standing on the edge of a lethal precipice in the dead of night, having just committed an act of intimate violence, the killer took the time to create a pristine still life of his victim's belongings. This act of order amidst the chaos of death reveals a mind that was entirely undisturbed by the horror of its own actions. The shoes were a silent declaration of total control, a way for the predator to leave his mark on the landscape and on the community. They were a show, don't tell, masterpiece of psychological domination, a physical manifestation of a killer who viewed the victim not as a person, but as a component in a dark, private ritual. In 2026, that image remains the defining symbol of the case, a reminder of the terrifying composure that can exist within the heart of a predator. The missing car keys remain the final fragment of the puzzle that the island has never been able to reclaim. While the victim's jewelry and cash were left untouched, a detail that effectively eliminated robbery as a motive, the keys vanished entirely. This missing item is a symbol of the tactical suppression that defined the entire incident. The keys represented the victim's mobility, her freedom, and her ability to navigate the world on her own terms. By taking them, the killer symbolically and practically ensured that her journey was over. The keys are a piece of the truth that remains hidden, perhaps buried in the silt of the ocean floor or kept as a silent trophy by a man who refused to give anything back to the community he betrayed. They are a reminder that even in a case with a definitive verdict, justice is often incomplete. There are parts of the story that will always be lost to the shadows, secrets that the killer will take to his grave, leaving the family and the community to forever wonder about the final, locked chapters of the victim's life. As we look across the island of Leon today, we are reminded that the silence of the cliffs is no longer a void, but a repository of memory. The case of the woman on the cliff has become a foundational part of the island's identity, a story that is told and retold as a way to maintain the vigilance that was so tragically missing in the late 2000s. The 1,600-word segments of this podcast have attempted to bridge the gap between the forensic facts and the human cost, but the true story of Leon is one that can only be felt in the salt air and the heavy quiet of the northern heights. The victim's life, a life of reliability and ordinary purpose, was stolen by a shadow that had been hiding in plain sight. Her legacy is found in the way the islanders now look out for one another, the way they have mapped the dead zones, and the way they have learned to recognize the darkness that can exist within their own boundaries. The cliffs remain a sentinel between the land and the sea, a place of profound beauty and unimaginable horror, standing as a permanent monument to a history that will never be forgotten. The investigation into the silence of the Leon Cliffs concludes here, but the echoes of the case will continue to vibrate through the rocks and the waves for as long as the island stands. We are left with the image of the ocean, the indifferent witness to all our tragedies, continuing its eternal rhythm against the shore. It is a force that is as magnificent as it is merciless, much like the story we have explored. The case of case number 5 was a moment of profound rupture, a time when a community was forced to confront the abyss and emerged with a deeper, more complicated understanding of itself. The predator is gone, the verdict is final, and the cliffs are finally at peace, but it is a peace that is built on the memory of everything that was lost in the long, dark hours of that Friday evening. The silence has found its voice, and it tells a story of hunt and capture, of shadow and light, and of the enduring resilience of a people who refuse to let the darkness have the final word. The woman who walked toward the parking lot at 1745 is finally at rest, her journey complete, her story forever woven into the fabric of the island she called home.